Hey there, tonight we're diving into the sweat-soaked stone floors of an ancient Greek gymnasium, where the truth is, the wrestling wasn't the only thing that left you breathless, but perhaps the strict diets and olive oil massages would. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyelids flutter open to the sound of distant chatter and the scent of olive oil. Yep, you're in ancient Greece, and it's time to experience the gymnasium. But don't grab those dusty Nikes just yet. You step out into the blinding morning light, and there it is, an open-air extravaganza of muscle, mind, and, well, more muscle. The place is teeming with half-naked athletes showcasing their physical prowess, philosophers locked in endless debate, and curious onlookers simply there for the spectacle. Forget those modern gyms full of treadmills and protein shakes. This is where the real action happens. First off, let's bust a myth faster than a Spartan could run a stadium race. The gymnasium wasn't just an ancient sports center. Sure, you'll find wrestling and running, but it was also the intellectual hub of the city. Think of it as the original TED talk venue, but with more sweat and fewer PowerPoint slides. Here, physical and mental fitness went hand in hand. Need proof? Aristotle himself was known to frequent these hallowed grounds, pondering life's mysteries while dodging flying discus. Imagine Socrates, the OG philosopher, striding through, perhaps questioning the point of running laps in the first place, while the athletes around him rolled their eyes and continued their routines. Now, onto the daily schedule. You might be thinking, how did they balance all this physical and mental exertion? Well, they had a regimen as precise as a philosopher's argument. The day typically kicked off at dawn, because why waste daylight when you can be wrestling in dirt by 6 a.m.? The early hours were dedicated to physical training. We're talking running tracks, jumping pits, and a wrestling ring, all wrapped in the sweet aroma of ambition and body odor. Athletes would oil themselves up, both for the aesthetic and to prevent injuries, and dive into rigorous exercise. And if you thought CrossFit was intense, try pancration, a brutal blend of boxing and wrestling with only 2 rules: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else was fair game. But hold up, this isn't just about getting ripped. In ancient Greece, physical fitness was a civic duty. A well-toned body wasn't just Instagram-worthy, it was a testament to one's character and citizenship. You see, the Greeks believed a sound body housed a sound mind. This was a society that didn't just want fit warriors, they wanted fit thinkers. That's why, after the sweat and toil, the philosophical discourse began. Picture this, Plato's dialogues unfolding in between stretches and sprints. It's like a boot camp where you also debate the nature of reality. One minute you're trying not to get choked out in a wrestling match. The next, you're contemplating the metaphysical implications of winning and losing. And here's where the heavyweights of thought come in, literally. The gymnasium was a breeding ground for ideas that would shape Western thought for centuries. It was like the Twitter of its day, only with fewer trolls and more toga-clad intellectuals. Young men, only men, mind you, since women were barred from these spaces, would gather to listen, learn, and occasionally challenge the wisdom of their elders. The likes of Pythagoras, Epicurus, and Zeno might have passed through these spaces, sowing the seeds of mathematics, ethics, and stoicism. Here, the gymnasium served as a bridge between the physical and the philosophical, where the body was trained, but the mind was honed. But let's not romanticize too much. While the notion of a gymnasium as a cerebral and physical oasis is appealing, it also served as a tool for social control. It was a place where the young elite were molded into the citizens the polis needed. This wasn't just about personal growth. It was about maintaining societal order. The gymnasium could be seen as a microcosm of the city-state, training the future leaders to be as disciplined in thought as they were in action. The pressure to conform was as thick as the sweat in the air. So here you stand, amidst the throng, trying to take it all in. The sun is rising higher, and the sounds of exertion meld with the hum of debate. You might chuckle at the idea of a gym as the heart of civic life, but for the Greeks, this was serious business. The gymnasium wasn't just a place to build abs of steel, but to forge minds of iron. As you watch a group of young men engage in friendly combat, you realize that this blend of physicality and philosophy is what set the foundation for much of Western culture. And if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, don't worry. You've still got the rest of the day to survive ancient Greece's most intense fitness and ideas boot camp. So here you stand, amidst the throng, trying to take it all in. The sun is rising higher, and the sounds of exertion meld with the hum of debate. You might chuckle at the idea of a gym as the heart of civic life, but for the Greeks, this was serious business. The gymnasium wasn't just a place to build abs of steel, but to forge minds of iron. As you watch a group of young men engage in friendly combat, you realize that this blend of physicality and philosophy is what set the foundation for much of Western culture. And if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, don't worry. You've still got the rest of the day to survive ancient Greece's most intense fitness and ideas boot camp. Before you can find a shady spot to contemplate your existence, a burly trainer, let's call him Leonidas, because why not, beckons you over to the wrestling pit. And no, it's not a cozy wrestling mat cushioned for modern sensibilities. This is bare earth, and it's about as forgiving as a Spartan mother. Wrestling, or pale, as the Greeks called it, was the staple workout to separate the men from the boys. Forget your high school wrestling team. This was raw, gritty, and, well, a tad brutal. As Leonidas demonstrates a few moves, you quickly realize that your idea of a warm-up, some light stretching and a jog, has been tossed out the window, much like you'd be if you dared to step into the ring unprepared. But wrestling isn't the only challenge on today's agenda. Next, you're handed a discus, which feels like a small, flat boulder. And here's a fun fact. This isn't just a game of fetch gone wrong. Discus throwing was an art form, requiring a mix of strength, precision, and grace. You need to hurl this weighty disc as far as possible, all while maintaining a form that would make a ballet dancer envious. And let's not forget the distances involved. The best throwers could send the discus soaring over 60 meters, which in today's terms is akin to flinging your TV remote across a football field and hoping it lands on the couch. Now, if those activities sound like a walk in the agora, let's talk about pancration. This is where the gloves and any remaining sense of civility come off. A mix of boxing and wrestling, pancration was the UFC of its time, minus the octagon and with much more sand in your face. The rules, pretty simple. Don't bite and keep your thumbs out of your opponent's eye sockets. Everything else was an open invitation for creative combat. It's no wonder that the word pancration literally means all powers. It's the kind of sport that makes you think twice about that second helping of roasted lamb. But why go through all this sweat and sand in the first place? Well, in ancient Greece, athletics were a passport to social prestige. Participating in these exercises wasn't just about personal glory. It was about proving your mettle as a citizen. Winning in these contests, especially in prestigious events like the Olympics or local games, could propel you to instant celebrity status. You'd earn statues in your honor, songs sung about your prowess, and perhaps most importantly, a respected voice in the democratic assemblies. Yet, here's where the plot thickens. Not everyone was eligible for this muscular pathway to fame. The gymnasium was a playground for the elite, the well-to-do citizens who could afford the luxury of time and training. Slaves and foreigners, they were on the sidelines, likely serving the athletes or maintaining the grounds. This wasn't just a sporting event. It was a show of power dynamics, where the exercise of body and mind was a privilege, not a right. And then there's the economic angle. Participating in these rigorous activities wasn't cheap. You needed a diet rich in protein, which meant fish, meat, and the odd amphora of olive oil, a staple that could cost as much as a week's wages for a laborer. Add to that the cost of hiring trainers, the maintenance of your equipment, and the occasional visit to the physician when pancration got a bit too intense, and you've got yourself an expensive hobby. For many, this was an investment in their social capital, a bet that their brawn and brains could elevate their family's status within the polis. So, as you stand there, dripping sweat, and perhaps cradling a bruised rib or two, you start to understand why these ancient Greeks were so obsessed with their gymnasia. It wasn't just about physical prowess. It was a stage where social, economic, and political dramas unfolded in real time. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the wrestling pits and discus fields, you realize that this world of sweat and strategy is as complex and cutthroat as any modern reality show. And just like that, You're hooked, ready for another day in this ancient arena where status is sculpted from muscle and wit. As you cradle that bruised rib and try to catch your breath, the sun reaches its zenith, casting a glaring spotlight on the next act of this Greek drama. It's time to swap the wrestling pit for the philosophical arena, a shaded enclave where the only thing getting thrown around are ideas, some half-baked, others sizzling with genius. You wander over, drawn by the chorus of animated voices echoing off ancient stone walls. Welcome to the intellectual heart of the Gymnasium, where mind games are just as intense as any physical contest. Here, in the cool shadows, you'll find the likes of Socrates, a man whose conversational stamina could rival any athlete's endurance. Forget the image of the aloof philosopher cloistered in some ivory tower. Socrates was more street philosopher than stuffy academic, prowling the Gymnasium like a curious cat, ready to pounce on any passing thought. Picture him, sandaled feet planted firmly on the ground, challenging the young and old alike with his relentless questions. This was a guy who could make you doubt the very existence of the bench you're sitting on, and he did it all with a wry grin and an insatiable thirst for truth. Socrates' method, known today as the Socratic method, because why not name a method after yourself if you're good at it, was less about teaching and more about provoking. He'd ask questions that sliced through assumptions like a hot knife through feta cheese. It wasn't about imparting knowledge, but igniting the spark of critical thinking. Imagine you're sitting there, munching on a fig, when Socrates hits you with, "What is justice?" Suddenly, your snack becomes a side dish to a feast of philosophical inquiry. Now, let's not forget Plato, Socrates' star pupil, and the original fanboy who took notes on everything his mentor said. Plato would eventually build on Socratic dialogue to create his own philosophical frameworks. His big thing, the theory of forms, an idea suggesting that the physical world is just a shadow of the true reality. It's like he took the red pill way before the Matrix made it cool. In these Gymnasium debates, Plato would test these lofty ideas, refining them through the friction of public discourse. And here's a fun fact. Socrates and Plato weren't just speaking to the converted. These discussions were public spectacles, open to anyone who cared to listen or argue. This included politicians, artisans, and the odd sandal maker who wandered in, perhaps hoping to sell a pair or two to these well-heeled thinkers. The Gymnasium was a melting pot, a place where social classes mingled, albeit unequally, and ideas were tossed around like discus. But let's not sugarcoat it. These philosophical exchanges weren't always high-minded debates. They could get heated, personal, and downright messy. Imagine a political rally mixed with a college debate and a touch of street theater. Voices would rise, tempers would flare, and occasionally someone might storm off in a huff, only to return later, drawn back by the irresistible pull of intellectual combat. This was philosophy as a contact sport, with egos clashing as forcefully as any pair of grappling athletes. It's tempting to romanticize these gatherings as the pinnacle of enlightened discourse, but let's inject a dose of reality. The Gymnasium wasn't just a bastion of free speech. It was also a venue of exclusion. Women were conspicuously absent, their voices silenced by social norms. Slaves, too, were relegated to the role of spectators, their minds as bound as their bodies. This was a forum for the privileged few, an intellectual playground for those with the leisure to ponder life's mysteries, while the rest toiled in the sun. Economically, these gatherings were a reflection of a society where knowledge equaled power. The ability to articulate ideas and sway opinions was a form of currency, one that could be leveraged in the political arena. Those who excelled in these debates could find themselves catapulted into positions of influence, their words echoing in the halls of the polis. In a world where rhetoric was king, the Gymnasium was the royal court. Yet, for all its exclusivity, the philosophical debates in the Gymnasium were a vital part of Greek democracy. They honed the skills of those who would go on to lead, ensuring that governance was not just a matter of brute force, but of thoughtful deliberation. As you sit there, soaking in the heated discussions, and occasionally dodging a stray olive pit, you start to see how these exchanges laid the groundwork for modern democratic discourse. It was messy, imperfect, and occasionally maddening, but it was also a crucible of ideas that continue to shape our world. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows over the Gymnasium, you realize that this ancient space, with its blend of physical prowess and intellectual firepower, was a microcosm of Greek society. It was a place where every muscle flexed and every idea debated was a step towards understanding the human condition. So, as you rise to leave, sweat drying on your skin and your mind buzzing with newfound insights, you can't help but feel a sense of awe. You've survived another day in the Gymnasium, where the body and mind are pushed to their limits, and where the past continues to echo into the present. And just as you think you've seen it all, the Gymnasium unveils its final act of the day, the grand social spectacle that is the bathhouse. You wander over, drawn by the promise of relief from the day's exertions and the whisper of political intrigue. Here, the Greeks perfected the art of mixing business with pleasure, and you're about to find out why the bathhouse was as essential to ancient life as the agora or the Acropolis. Picture this. You're stepping into a communal space where the air is thick with steam and the scent of lavender soap clings to the walls. The bathhouse isn't just a place to rinse off the sweat and dust of the wrestling pit. It's a networking event that makes LinkedIn look like child's play. In these echoing chambers, alliances are forged, rivalries simmer, and deals are struck over the soothing splash of warm water. Let's talk economics for a moment, because even in ancient Greece, nothing comes cheap. Maintaining a gymnasium, with its vast array of facilities, was a serious financial commitment. The sheer logistics of running one could make your head spin. We're talking about the cost of maintaining the grounds, paying the trainers, and keeping those bathhouses stocked with olive oil and aromatic herbs. And who footed the bill for all this? Well, it was a mix of public funding and private benefactors, the original patrons of the arts and abs. Public funding in ancient Greece was a bit of a mixed bag. Some of it came from taxes, but a lot was based on liturgies, a kind of civic duty for the wealthy. Imagine being so rich that sponsoring a public gymnasium was the equivalent of today's tax write-off. These liturgies were both a burden and a badge of honor, a way for the elite to flaunt their wealth while contributing to the public good. It was like being named most likely to fund a marble statue in your high school yearbook. Yet, even with public funds, gymnasiums were not free-for-alls. They were exclusive, predominantly male domains, with access largely restricted to citizens of the polis, foreigners and slaves. Sorry, no steam baths for you. This exclusivity wasn't just about maintaining social order. It was a way to reinforce the hierarchy and ensure that only the right people mingled in these spaces. The gymnasium was a cross between a country club and a political arena, where who you knew mattered as much as what you could lift. Now, let's dive into the social dynamics swirling in these warm waters. In the bathhouse, the lines between personal and political blurred faster than you could say Eureka, which, by the way, was famously exclaimed by Archimedes in a bath, though in a different time and place. Political alliances were as fluid as the water itself, shifting with the tides of ambition and opportunity. Imagine the scene. You're soaking in a pool, leaning back against the marble, when suddenly the local magistrate sidles over. A few pleasantries later, you're discussing city affairs, and maybe hinting at a lucrative contract for your family business. But hold your horses, or chariots, because this wasn't just a gentleman's club for exchanging pleasantries. The bathhouse was also a hotbed for gossip, where reputations could be made or unmade with a casual whisper. In a society where public image was everything, the stories circulated in these steamy rooms could elevate a politician to new heights or plunge him into scandal. It was the ancient equivalent of a tabloid press. Only the headlines were etched in the minds of those who mattered. The bathhouse was also a stage for personal rivalries. You might find yourself lounging next to a fellow citizen who just bested you in a wrestling match or out-argued you in a philosophical debate. Here, you couldn't just walk away from a confrontation. Instead, you had to navigate these tensions with diplomacy, turning potential foes into allies, or at least neutralizing a threat with a well-placed compliment about their discus throw. And let's not forget the role of the bathhouse as a place of relaxation and recovery. After a day of physical and intellectual exertion, the warm water was a balm for aching muscles and weary minds. You'd emerge from the steam, refreshed and ready to tackle the evening symposium or family dinner. The Greeks understood that a sound body was just as much about recovery as it was about exertion. That's a lesson some modern fitness gurus could take to heart. So, as you lounge in the bath, the steam swirling around you like a toga in a breeze, consider the complex social dance playing out. The gymnasium wasn't just a place to flex your muscles or your mind. It was a microcosm of Greek society, where every interaction was a step in the larger dance of politics, economy, and social status. And as you towel off and prepare to re-enter the world outside, you realize that this ancient social network was as vital to the Greeks as any app on your smartphone. The bathhouse was, in many ways, the final test of your day in the gymnasium. It required not just physical stamina, but social acumen and an understanding of the intricate web of relationships that defined Greek life. In this place, you were not just a citizen, but an active participant in the civic drama that unfolded every day, a drama that would set the stage for the next chapter in this epic tale of ancient athleticism and intellect. As you step out into the fading light of the afternoon, the cool air a refreshing contrast to the heat of the baths, you're left with the sense that the gymnasium is far more than an ancient fitness center. It's a living, breathing organism, pulsating with the ambitions, rivalries, and dreams of the city. And as you walk away, you can't help but feel a little bit wiser, a little bit stronger, and a whole lot more aware of the intricate dance that is life in ancient Greece. As you stroll away from the bathhouse with the sun dipping below the horizon, a golden glow casts long shadows over the gymnasium, a place that, by now, feels like an ancient version of a 24-hour fitness center, but with more philosophy and fewer elliptical machines. You've survived a day in this whirlwind of sweat, intellect, and social maneuvering. And as you reflect on the exhausting experience, it becomes clear why a modern soul might struggle to last long in such an environment. It's not just the physical demands or the mental gymnastics. It's the sheer intensity of living in a society where every muscle flexed and every word spoken is layered with meaning and consequence. Let's start with the physical toll. Sure, you might fancy yourself as a weakened warrior, but the Greeks took athleticism to a whole new level. The demands of pancration alone would send most of us running for the nearest couch. Imagine engaging in a sport with rules so minimal that they might as well read. Try not to kill each other. The idea of spending your mornings wrestling in dirt, afternoons debating Socratic methods, and evenings navigating social hierarchies sounds like a reality show waiting to happen. Ancient Greece survivor, anyone. But the gymnasium was more than just a stage for personal glory or intellectual posturing. It was the backbone of a society that valued physical prowess as much as it did philosophical inquiry. This dual commitment to body and mind laid the foundation for Western education systems, where the phrase, a sound mind in a sound body, still echoes in gymnasiums worldwide. It's a legacy that survived the ages, from the Renaissance humanists who revived these ideals to modern schools that balance academics with athletics. Yet, for all its contributions, the Greek gymnasium wasn't exactly a utopian paradise. Let's talk economics. Participating in this world required not just physical and intellectual capital, but financial clout. Maintaining peak physical condition wasn't cheap. An athlete's diet was rich in meat and olive oil, luxuries that could drain a common laborer's weekly earnings. And let's not forget the cost of trainers and medical care, which makes today's gym memberships look like a bargain bin option at your local supermarket. Politically, the gymnasium was a microcosm of Greek democracy, or rather, its idealized version. Though it was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the olive oil, it was also a bastion of exclusivity. Only free male citizens could participate, a fact that would make any modern advocate of gender equality and inclusivity wince. Women, slaves, and foreigners were barred from these spaces, their voices absent from the debates that would shape the polis. The gymnasium, for all its intellectual and physical brawn, reinforced the social hierarchies of its time, a reality as cold as the marble floors under those sandaled feet. Despite these limitations, the influence of the gymnasium is undeniable. It was here that the seeds of public debate forums were sown. The very act of engaging in dialogue, of challenging ideas in a public setting, has left an indelible mark on Western culture. This spirit of debate and discussion has permeated everything from the Roman Forum to the British Parliament and beyond. Even today, we see echoes of it in the town halls and debate stages where modern politicians spar. It's a testament to the enduring power of rhetoric. an art form honed in those ancient arenas. And speaking of influence, let's not overlook the Gymnasium's impact on sports. The Olympic Games, anyone. Born out of the same Greek ideals of competition and excellence, these games have become a global spectacle, a far cry from their humble beginnings in dusty arenas. The Olympic spirit, with its emphasis on participation, fair play, and pushing human limits, traces its lineage back to those ancient gymnasia where athletes competed not just for personal glory, but for the honor of their city-states. Yet, while it's tempting to romanticize the Greek Gymnasium as a cradle of civilization, we must also confront its less savory aspects. The exclusionary practices, the emphasis on physical perfection at the expense of inclusivity, and the economic barriers that reinforced social divides. These are reminders that even the most revered institutions have their shadows. The Gymnasium was a place of contradictions, a reflection of a society striving for idealism while grappling with the realities of power and privilege. As you leave the Gymnasium behind, with the night air cooling your skin and your thoughts, you're left with a nuanced understanding of this ancient world. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of bygone era, to envision Greece as a land of marble columns and philosophical giants. But beneath the surface lies a complex tapestry of ambition, hierarchy, and human endeavor. The Gymnasium was not just a place to build bodies and sharpen minds. It was a stage where the drama of human nature played out in all its glory and folly. In the end, the Greek Gymnasium offers us a mirror, reflecting both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its imperfections. It challenges us to consider the legacy we inherit and the one we leave behind. So, as you walk away, tired but enlightened, you realize that surviving a day in ancient Greece requires more than just stamina. It demands a willingness to confront the complexities of history and the echoes they leave in our modern world. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding makes the journey worthwhile. In the dusty village of Afshana, nestled in what is now Uzbekistan, a young boy named Ibn Sina, who the Western world would come to know as Avicenna, was already making waves. Picture this. It's the year 980, and while the rest of the neighborhood kids are busy with the medieval equivalent of tick-tock dances, Ibn Sina is hunched over a manuscript of Aristotle, at age 10. Yes, the same age when most of us were probably figuring out how to ride a bike without training wheels. Now, before you start envisioning this kid as some kind of ancient superhero, let's clarify a few things. Was he a genius? Absolutely. But did he have a photographic memory that allowed him to memorize the Quran by age 10, as legend suggests? Well, let's just say that stories got about as much truth as a fish riding a bicycle. The reality is more nuanced. Ibn Sina was incredibly diligent and had a passion for learning that bordered on obsessive. He was the kind of kid who'd read through the night, probably under the covers with a candle, because let's be honest, the Persian Empire wasn't exactly teeming with nightlights. Speaking of the empire, it was a bit of a mixed bag at the time. Picture a patchwork quilt, but the pieces are squabbling city-states, and the needle and thread are political intrigue and alliances. The Achaemenid dynasty, which ruled over Ibn Sina's hometown, was one of the more stable regimes, but even their rule was about as predictable as a cat on a leash. However, their patronage of the arts and sciences made the region a hotbed of intellectual activity, which was perfect for our young prodigy. Fast forward a few years, and Ibn Sina is 16. Most teenagers at this age are dealing with acne and awkward school dances, but not him. He's busy handling his first medical appointment. That's right, folks. While some of us were struggling through high school biology, Ibn Sina was diagnosing patients. He treated the local emir, and as the story goes, cured him of an ailment that had stumped the other doctors. Whether it was a miraculous recovery or just good timing, it earned him a place in the ruler's court and access to an impressive library. And no, he didn't just Google it, though one can only imagine the medieval version of "Did you try turning it off and on again?" As Ibn Sina grew, so did his reputation. His travels across the Persian Empire were less about wanderlust and more about necessity. You see, court politics were as treacherous as a Game of Thrones plotline. Rulers changed like seasons, and alliances were about as stable as a house built on sand. Ibn Sina's journey saw him zigzag across the empire, not just to escape political upheaval, but to seek knowledge wherever he could find it. He was a one-man knowledge sponge, soaking up everything from medicine to philosophy and leaving a trail of awestruck scholars in his wake. His intellect was prodigious, sure, but it was his drive that was truly extraordinary. Ibn Sina had this insatiable hunger for learning, and he pursued it with a tenacity that would put most marathon runners to shame. Picture him hopping from city to city, dodging political snares, all while juggling the complexities of metaphysics and medicine. It's a wonder he didn't burn out, but then again, caffeine was practically a food group in the medieval Islamic world. By the time he hit his 20s, Ibn Sina had amassed an impressive body of work, including his first of many medical texts. This wasn't your average, how to bandage a boo-boo kind of book. His writings were comprehensive, covering everything from anatomy to pharmacology, and laid the groundwork for medical practices for centuries. It's like writing the definitive guide to medicine before you're even old enough to rent a camel on your own. But let's not get swept away in the legend without acknowledging the grit. Ibn Sina's life wasn't all libraries and scholarly debates. It involved a fair bit of running from political enemies and dealing with the kind of rivalries that make modern academic spats look like playground tiffs. The man had to navigate a world where the wrong word could land you in hot water faster than you can say heresy. Yet through it all, he managed to leave an indelible mark on history. In the end, Ibn Sina's story is less about memorizing texts and more about the relentless pursuit of knowledge in a world that was as unpredictable as it was dangerous. It's about a kid from a small village who dared to dream big and had the audacity to follow through. More than just a historical figure, he was a testament to the power of curiosity and the impact of a well-read mind. And let's be honest, that's a legacy that's hard to top. Speaking of legacies, let's flip the page to Ibn Sina's crowning achievement, the Canon of Medicine. This isn't just some dusty old tome you'd find propping up the leg of a wobbly table in a forgotten library. Oh no, this was the medical equivalent of a chart-topping hit that stayed at number 1 for, wait for it, over 6 centuries. Imagine a book so influential that it was still being used as a medical textbook in Europe as late as the 17th century. That's right, folks. While Shakespeare was penning plays, aspiring doctors were still thumbing through Ibn Sina's canon like it was the latest New York Times bestseller. So, what made this 5-volume encyclopedia such a blockbuster? First, it was comprehensive in a way that would put modern encyclopedias to shame. Volume 1, Theoretical Medicine, covering everything from the basic principles of physiology to the causes of diseases. Volume 2, Drugs and Remedies, cataloging over 760 different types of medicine, and that's just for starters. The canon was essentially the medieval version of WebMD, but without the anxiety-inducing symptom checker. Instead, it offered a systematic approach to medicine that was both revolutionary and practical. But let's not get lost in the romantic glow of ancient wisdom without taking a closer look at the nitty-gritty. Producing a book of this magnitude wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It was more like a marathon with hurdles made of gold leaf and parchment. You see, back in the day, books were copied by hand, a painstaking process that would make even the most seasoned scribe groan. Each copy of the canon could take months to produce, and that's assuming you didn't run out of ink or patience. And let's talk costs. In the medieval Islamic world, producing a single book could cost as much as a house. We're talking serious real estate investment here, folks. Yet, despite the expense, Ibn Sina's work spread like wildfire. How? Enter the bustling trade routes of the Silk Road, where ideas traveled alongside silk and spices. The canon reached Europe, where it was translated into Latin and found a new audience among the burgeoning universities of the medieval West. It's like the original viral hit, only without the cat videos. Now, here's where things get a little less glamorous. Medieval medicine often gets a bad rap, and for good reason. This was an era when some treatments made your grandma's home remedies look like cutting-edge science. Bloodletting, for instance, was all the rage. The idea was to balance the humors. No, not a medieval stand-up routine, but the bodily fluids thought to influence health. And don't even get me started on leeches. They were practically a doctor's best friend, slapped onto patients like medieval band-aids. Yet, Ibn Sina's canon wasn't just about the weird and wacky. It was a beacon of rational thought in a world that was still figuring out why washing your hands before surgery might be a good idea. Instead of simply following the status quo, Ibn Sina dared to question it. He combined classical knowledge with his own observations, pushing back against the medical myths of his time. In a world that could be as superstitious as a Friday the 13th marathon, that was no small feat. So, the next time you're stuck in a waiting room, thumbing through outdated magazines, spare a thought for Ibn Sina. His canon of medicine wasn't just a book, it was a game changer. It laid the groundwork for a more systematic and scientific approach to medicine, leaving a legacy that outlasted empires and endured through the ages. While we can chuckle at the thought of bloodletting and leeches, let's not forget that our medical ancestors were doing the best they could with what they knew. In a way, they were just as curious and determined as Ibn Sina himself. And don't worry, there's plenty more to explore in the next chapters of his life. We've only scratched the surface of Ibn Sina's story, and there's a whole lot more to uncover. From his philosophical musings to his contributions to other scientific fields, this polymath's journey is far from over. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of Ibn Sina's life and times, one thread at a time. Now, speaking of Ibn Sina's legacy, let's take a left turn from medicine and dive headfirst into the philosophical pool where he made just as big a splash. If you thought his medical texts were something to write home about, wait until you hear about his philosophical musings. We're talking about a guy who didn't just stop at fixing bodies. He wanted to understand the very essence of existence. So, buckle up, because this is where things get both heady and, well, a little controversial. Ibn Sina was essentially the philosophical equivalent of a DJ spinning Aristotle's greatest hits and remixing them with Islamic theology. Picture him as the medieval mashup artist, blending Greek rationalism with the spiritual melodies of Islam. It's like Plato met Muhammad at a philosophical rave, and Ibn Sina was the guy dropping the beat. His magnum opus in this arena, the Book of Healing, and no, it's not about medicine. This was a 4-volume philosophical treatise that tackled everything from logic and natural sciences to mathematics and metaphysics. So what was the big idea? Ibn Sina was on a mission to create a unified theory of knowledge that harmonized reason with faith. He took Aristotelian logic, which was all about observing the natural world, and tried to weave it into the rich tapestry of Islamic thought, which focused on divine revelation. It was a bold move, like trying to make a smoothie out of oranges and steak, a recipe that could go wonderfully right or hilariously wrong. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was on board with his philosophical smoothie. In fact, Ibn Sina's ideas were about as welcome in some circles as a porcupine at a balloon party. Theologians of his time were a bit like those grumpy food critics who are never satisfied with the menu. They found his attempts to reconcile philosophy with theology a little too spicy for their taste. Ibn Sina questioned established religious doctrines with the audacity of someone who'd ask a magician how they pulled a rabbit out of a hat. He wasn't trying to debunk faith. He just wanted to understand how it all fit together. This curiosity, however, struck a controversial chord. His work sparked debates and raised eyebrows across the Islamic world. Some theologians saw his ideas as a threat, a philosophical Trojan horse that could undermine the very foundations of their beliefs. You could imagine them sitting around in their scholarly robes, wagging their fingers and shaking their heads, much like modern-day pundits debating the merits of pineapple on pizza. The result, Ibn Sina's philosophical endeavors were often met with resistance and in some cases outright condemnation. But let's not forget that controversy is often the midwife of progress. While some theologians were busy labeling him a heretic, others were intrigued, drawn to his ideas like moths to a flame. Ibn Sina's work laid the groundwork for future Islamic philosophers, like Averroes and Al-Ghazali, to grapple with the big questions of existence, knowledge, and faith. He was a trailblazer, carving a path that would eventually lead to the flourishing of Islamic philosophy during the golden age of Islam. And let's not overlook his influence beyond the Islamic world. Ibn Sina's works were translated into Latin and found an eager audience among European scholars. In medieval Europe, where the philosophical scene was as dry as a medieval biscuit, Ibn Sina's ideas were like a refreshing glass of intellectual lemonade. His attempts to reconcile faith with reason resonated with Christian philosophers, who were themselves wrestling with how to integrate Aristotle's works into a religious framework. So, what's the takeaway here? Ibn Sina was a thinker who didn't shy away from the hard questions. He dared to ask how the world worked, and where humanity fit into the grand scheme of things. He tried to bridge two worlds, science and religion, that were often at odds. Today, his ideas might earn him a spot on a late-night debate show, sandwiched between a segment on quantum physics and a cooking demo. Back then, they sparked debates that reverberated across continents and centuries. As we peel back the layers of Ibn Sina's philosophical journey, it's clear that his legacy was more than just texts and treatises. It was about challenging the status quo and inviting others to do the same. His intellectual curiosity was infectious, and his willingness to explore uncharted territories inspired generations of thinkers. Sure, his ideas might have ruffled a few feathers, but isn't that what great thinkers do? They shake things up, make us question our assumptions, and encourage us to think a little deeper. Ibn Sina was more than just a philosopher. He was an intellectual pioneer, and his journey was far from over. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover in the saga of this remarkable polymath. So here we are, diving into the later chapters of Ibn Sina's life, a time when his reputation was as grand as a Persian palace, but his reality was more like the crumbling walls of a besieged fortress. You see, while Ibn Sina was busy juggling medicine, philosophy, and a side gig as a vizier, the political landscape around him was shifting like sand dunes in a desert storm. The Ubaid dynasty, under which he served, was a swirling vortex of intrigue, ambition, and the occasional backstabbing. Think of it as a medieval version of a political thriller, but with less Netflix and more knife-wielding courtiers. Now, being a polymath in such a volatile environment was a bit like being a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Ibn Sina had to navigate this political minefield with the grace of a ballerina and the cunning of a chess grandmaster. His role as a vizier, essentially the CEO of the government, was no small feat. It required balancing the budget, mollifying rival factions, and occasionally playing musical chairs with military commanders' positions. All this while still finding time to pen a few treatises on metaphysics. Talk about multitasking. But here's where the plot thickens like a stew left on the stove too long. Ibn Sina's involvement in politics wasn't just a matter of ambition, it was survival. The Ubaid rulers were perpetually paranoid, forever suspicious of coup attempts. Being close to power meant living under the constant threat of falling out of favor, which could happen faster than you can say off with his head. And yet, Ibn Sina managed to keep his head, both literally and figuratively. His intellect and strategic mind made him indispensable, even if it also made him a target. He was the kind of guy who could diagnose a fever and political instability in the same breath, which, let's be honest, was probably a necessity in that environment. But his brilliance was a double-edged sword. In a world where envy and suspicion were as common as sand grains, his success was both his shield and his Achilles' heel. Then, like a plot twist nobody wanted, Ibn Sina found himself on the wrong side of political shuffle. Imagine the irony. A man who'd saved countless lives with his medical expertise now found himself imprisoned, not by disease or plague, but by the whims of power-hungry rulers. Yes, our polymath hero ended up in a cell, proving once again that the universe has a wicked sense of humor. It's almost poetic in a dark, twisted way, a healer who couldn't heal the sickness of betrayal. But let's not get too somber just yet. Ibn Sina was no ordinary prisoner. Even in captivity, he managed to keep his wits sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. He wrote some of his most profound works during this time, proving that you can cage a man but not his mind. It's a testament to the human spirit, or perhaps just stubbornness, that he refused to let his circumstances dictate his legacy. After all, a man who could find inspiration in a dungeon is one you don't easily forget. Of course, Ibn Sina's imprisonment wasn't just about political rivalry. It was a reflection of the cost of genius in a world that feared it. The same brilliance that made him a revered physician and philosopher also made him a threat to those who preferred ignorance over enlightenment. In a society where power was the ultimate currency, knowledge was both a gift and a burden, and Ibn Sina bore it with the grace of a man who knew his worth, even if others didn't. Eventually, Ibn Sina's fortunes turned again, because if nothing else, history loves a good comeback story. Released from his cell, he didn't just pick up where he left off. He sprinted. He returned to his medical practice with the zeal of a man who'd seen the abyss and decided it wasn't for him. His writings continued to flow, and his influence only grew. It's almost as if confinement had fueled his fire rather than extinguishing it. But the political landscape remained as unstable as ever. The Buyid dynasty was on its last legs, plagued by internal strife and external threats. Ibn Sina, ever the realist, knew that the winds of change were blowing, and they weren't bringing a gentle breeze. He found himself once again on the move, this time seeking refuge with the Achaemenid ruler Ala al-Dawla in Isfahan. It was here that he found a semblance of stability, allowing him to focus on his work without constantly looking over his shoulder. Yet, even in Isfahan, life was no walk in the park. The threat of invasion loomed large, and Ibn Sina found himself caught in the crossfire of yet another political upheaval. But if there's one thing we can learn from Ibn Sina's life, it's that he was a master of adaptation. Like a cat that always lands on its feet, he navigated these challenges with a mix of cunning and resilience that was nothing short of remarkable. And so, as we leave this chapter of Ibn Sina's life, it's clear that his story is one of contrasts. A healer who found himself imprisoned, a philosopher in a world of warriors, and a polymath in a time of political chaos. His life was a tapestry woven with threads of brilliance, struggle, and an unwavering pursuit of knowledge. And while the world around him was as turbulent as a stormy sea, Ibn Sina remained a beacon of intellect and curiosity, shining bright against the odds. But don't worry, we're not finished with him yet. There's still more to uncover in the final chapter of his extraordinary journey. Stay tuned. And as we bid adieu to Isfahan, let's tackle the elephant in the room, Ibn Sina's legacy. Spoiler alert, it's a doozy. If you're still wondering why his name rings louder than a medieval church bell centuries later, sit tight. Ibn Sina's influence stretched far beyond his own backyard, leaving an indelible mark that's as hard to scrub out as a medieval ink spill. His works weren't just dusty old tomes, they were the building blocks of modern science and philosophy. First off, let's talk medicine. Remember the canon of medicine? Barely out of the medieval gates. It was translated into Latin in the 12th century and became the go-to medical text in Europe for the next 600 years. That's right, 6 centuries, longer than the Roman Empire lasted. And this wasn't just because people liked a good read. It was because the canon was a goldmine of medical knowledge that was, frankly, ahead of its time. It offered a systematic approach to disease diagnosis and treatment that put the old, just slap a leech on it and call it a day method to shame. Ibn Sina's rigorous analysis of over 800 plant-based medications was revolutionary, setting the stage for more scientific methods in pharmacology. But let's not kid ourselves. His influence wasn't limited to medicine. Ibn Sina was the intellectual equivalent of a Swiss army knife, useful in more ways than you'd expect. His philosophical works, especially the Book of Healing, were like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy halls of medieval academia. He dared to ask questions like, what's the nature of being? And how does the soul relate to the body? The kind of stuff that makes modern existentialists swoon. His attempts to harmonize Aristotle's logic with Islamic theology were like trying to mix oil and water, but somehow he made it work. This intellectual cocktail inspired not just Islamic thinkers, but also medieval European philosophers. Figures like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus were sipping from Ibn Sina's philosophical well, blending his thoughts with Christian doctrine. They might not have agreed with everything, but they sure appreciated a good debate. Now, let's tackle the myth of Ibn Sina's death. Legends abound, each more melodramatic than a soap opera finale. Some say he was poisoned by a jealous rival. Others claim he succumbed to a mysterious illness brought on by overwork. But the truth, most likely, he died of a colic attack at the age of 56, a mundane end for an extraordinary life. It's almost poetic when you think about it. Here was a man who spent his life unraveling the mysteries of the human body, only to be brought down by an ailment that's essentially a stomachache. It's a reminder that even the greats weren't immune to the same pesky problems that plague us all. Speaking of problems, let's not romanticize his era too much. We're talking about a time when the average life expectancy was about 30 years, assuming you didn't catch a stray arrow or succumb to the plague. The medieval world was no paradise. It was a place where knowledge was as prized as it was dangerous. Ibn Sina's life was a testament to the power of the mind in a world that often prioritized brawn over brains. He managed to carve out a legacy not just by being a genius, but by being a relentless seeker of truth in an age that could have used more of it. So, why does Ibn Sina's name still resonate today? It's not just because he was a polymath who could have probably aced any standardized test. It's because his works laid the groundwork for future generations to build upon. He was a torchbearer of knowledge in a time when the light of reason was often flickering. His contributions weren't just about advancing science or philosophy. They were about expanding the horizons of human understanding. He dared to ask questions that others didn't even know needed asking, and in doing so, he changed the course of history. In the grand tapestry of time, Ibn Sina is a shining thread that refuses to fade. His legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a timeless endeavor, one that transcends borders, languages, and epochs. It's a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and the impact of a mind unafraid to explore the unknown. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of the universe, or just trying to figure out how to fix a stubborn Wi-Fi connection, remember Ibn Sina. Because in the end, his story isn't just about a man who lived 1,000 years ago. It's about all of us and our endless quest to understand the world around us. In the bustling heart of Buenos Aires, a city that dances to its own tango rhythm, Jorge Luis Borges was born in 1899, just as the 19th century was preparing to hand the baton over to the 20th. Now, if you think of Buenos Aires as a place of steamy romance and sultry nights, you're not entirely wrong, but let's add a dash of something more cerebral to that mix. Borges' family was not your average Porteño clan. On one side, they boasted a rich military tradition. Think grandfathers who galloped alongside Argentina's great liberators. On the other, they were steeped in literature, with bookshelves groaning under the weight of hefty tomes in multiple languages. It's like being born into a dynasty where Don Quixote rides shotgun with a soldier. Young Jorge was practically marinated in stories and history from the get-go. By age 9, he was reading Shakespeare, which, let's be honest, makes most of us feel like underachievers. While other kids were figuring out how to tie their shoelaces, Borges was entangled in the complex webs of Macbeth and Hamlet, probably wondering why these people just couldn't talk things out. His father, Jorge Guillermo Borges, was a lawyer with literary aspirations, and his mother, Leonor Acevedo Suarez, was his staunch supporter. They ensured that their little prodigy had access to the best education possible, a move that would eventually see him wander far from home. By 1914, the world was on the brink of chaos, and the Borges family found themselves in Geneva, Switzerland. It's here that young Jorge's education took a decidedly international turn. The Swiss, with their precision and neutrality, seemed an odd place for a future literary rebel, but it was perfect for honing his multilingual skills. Imagine Borges sitting in a classroom, effortlessly switching between French, German, and who knows what else, while his classmates struggled with the basics. He completed his education at the Collège de Genève, and if there were a diploma for precociousness, Borges would have had it framed on his wall. The Great War raged on, but Borges was busy crafting his first essays and poems, which were published in local magazines. He was just getting started, but his words were already weaving intricate labyrinths that would become his signature. His early works were filled with the kind of youthful idealism that can only come from someone who hasn't yet been ground down by the realities of life, or maybe just someone who hasn't had to pay rent yet. Now, here's a twist worthy of a Borges plot. During World War I, there was a rather amusing incident where Borges was mistaken for an English spy. Yes, you heard that right. A bespectacled young man with a love for literature was thought to be a secret agent. It's the kind of mix-up that seems ripped straight from a Monty Python sketch. Picture him, flustered and bemused, trying to explain that he was more interested in the mysteries of the universe than military secrets. This little espionage debacle didn't slow him down, though. After the war, Borges and his family moved to Spain, where he mingled with avant-garde writers and artists. It was here that he fully embraced the literary life, shedding any lingering notions of normalcy. By the time he returned to Buenos Aires in the early 1920s, he had a suitcase full of ideas and a mind brimming with stories that would eventually redefine literature itself. Borges' early life was a blend of the extraordinary and the absurd, a fitting prelude to a career that would explore the boundaries of reality and fiction. In his world, the lines between history and myth were delightfully blurred, and every story was a chance to explore the infinite possibilities of the universe. As we delve deeper into his life, remember that for Borges, the real adventure was always in the labyrinths of the mind. And so, with a mind like a kaleidoscope of literature and a suitcase full of avant-garde aspirations, Borges landed back in Buenos Aires in the early 1920s. This wasn't exactly the same Buenos Aires he'd left. The city, much like a tango dancer with a penchant for drama, was poised on the edge of a tumultuous era. Argentina was doing the economic cha-cha, stepping forward with bursts of prosperity, only to stumble back into instability. Inflation was dancing with wages, and the political scene was a carousel of coup attempts and shifting power dynamics. Enter Borges, with his penchant for labyrinths and a knack for seeing the world through a multifaceted lens. It was no surprise that Borges would find himself right at home in this swirling chaos. He became a leading voice in the ultraist literary movement, which was all about breaking the chains of traditional literature and embracing bold, new forms. Forget the flowery prose of the past. Ultraists were slashing through the old with a machete of modernism, building something raw and vibrant from the rubble. This movement was less about whispering sweet nothings and more about shouting profound somethings. Borges' return to Argentina was like a shot of espresso to the literary scene. His work offered both an escape from the economic turmoil and a mirror reflecting its complexities. In a country where the peso was losing its footing faster than a clumsy dancer, Borges' words were a stable currency of thought. He began publishing in local magazines, challenging his contemporaries with works that were as enigmatic as they were enlightening. His writing was a refuge, a place where the labyrinths of his mind offered shelter from the storms raging outside. Now, let's take a detour into one of the more peculiar chapters of Borges' life, his stint as a public librarian. Picture this, a man who lived and breathed books, surrounded by them all day. Sounds idyllic, right? But here's the twist. Borges was supposed to be shelving books, not just reading them. His supervisors expected him to be a cog in the library machine, keeping the books in order, like a literary Marie Kondo. But Borges, whose mind was forever wandering through infinite possibilities, found himself more captivated by the stories than their Dewey Decimal numbers. To say his supervisors were unimpressed would be an understatement. They were less SHHing librarians and more harumping bureaucrats, perplexed by this dreamer in their midst. Borges' infamous tendency to read rather than reshelve didn't exactly earn him Employee of the Month. Still, let's not be too hard on the guy. He was busy crafting literary masterpieces while pretending to stockpile knowledge. It was a classic case of a square peg in a round hole, or in Borges' case, a literary genius in a bureaucratic bind. Back in the broader world of 1920s Argentina, the country was navigating through a maze of its own. The decade was marked by a series of economic booms and busts, each wave crashing harder than the last. The agricultural sector, once the backbone of the economy, was experiencing a roller coaster of demand and price fluctuations. The burgeoning urban middle class was feeling the pinch of rising costs, and political tensions simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Nationalism was creeping in, bringing with it a fervor for change, or at least the illusion of it. In this environment, Borges' writing served as both a balm and a beacon. His works, rich with metaphor and meaning, offered a glimpse into the infinite possibilities of thought, a welcome distraction from the finite resources of everyday life. It's no exaggeration to say that Borges was building entire worlds with his words, worlds where the economic and political chaos of Argentina could be momentarily forgotten. Of course, Borges wasn't just a passive observer of the tumult around him. His involvement in the ultraist movement was a form of literary rebellion, a challenge to the status quo that resonated with many who felt disillusioned by the current state of affairs. His work was a rallying cry for those yearning for something more, a reminder that creativity could flourish even in the most uncertain times. As we leave Borges amidst the towering stacks of the library, pondering the mysteries of the universe while his supervisors scowl, Remember that this was just one chapter in a life filled with twists and turns. Borges' journey was far from over, and the labyrinths he would navigate next promised to be even more intricate and intriguing. As Borges sat amidst the library stacks, pondering the universe instead of shelving books, he was crafting more than just literary masterpieces. He was also laying the groundwork for a style that would come to define his work, the labyrinthine narrative. It was a fitting metaphor for a man who saw the world as an intricate puzzle, and it all culminated in his groundbreaking collections, Fixians and El Aleph. These works were the literary equivalent of a Rubik's Cube, complex, colorful, and endlessly fascinating. Now, let's dive into Fixians, published in 1944. This wasn't just a book. It was a literary experiment that threw the rulebook out the window. Imagine Borges as a master illusionist, weaving stories that were as much about the act of storytelling as the tales themselves. Within its pages, Borges played with the idea of reality being a construct, a series of mirrors reflecting back at each other. He questioned the nature of existence, and whether what we perceive is genuinely real or just a figment of our collective imagination. It's the kind of stuff that would make a philosophy professor's head spin faster than a dreidel at Hanukkah. In Fixians, Borges introduced us to the concept of the infinite library in the Library of Babel, a universe in the form of a library, containing all possible books, every permutation of letters and words. It's a vision that would send any bibliophile into paroxysms of joy, or possibly despair, at the sheer impossibility of reading everything. Borges' library becomes a metaphor for the universe, a boundless maze of knowledge where one could wander forever and never reach the end. To put it in modern terms, it's like the internet, but without the memes, or maybe it's exactly like the internet because of the endless rabbit holes. Then there's El Aleph, published in 1949, which takes the idea of infinite perspective to dizzying heights. The titular story of the collection revolves around a small point in space, an Aleph, in which the entire universe can be seen simultaneously. It's a mind-bending concept, one that challenges the very limits of human perception. For Borges, the Aleph is not just a tiny point in space, but a gateway to the infinite. It's like having a cosmic Google Earth, allowing you to zoom in and out on the universe at will. Now, let's shatter a few myths around Borges' supposed otherworldly writing habits. Legend has it that Borges wrote in a trance-like state, communing with the literary muses. The reality, Borges was a meticulous craftsman, more akin to a jeweler cutting a perfect diamond than a mystic channeling divine inspiration. He wrote and rewrote, honing his prose until it gleamed with a precision that belied its complexity. Sure, he had a vivid imagination, but there was nothing supernatural about his process. Just good old-fashioned hard work, and an uncanny ability to see the world from a unique perspective. And what about that playful jest that he was the true author of Don Quixote? In his short story, Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote, Borges humorously suggests that rewriting Cervantes' classic work word for word in the 20th century would be an entirely original act. It's a delightful paradox, one that pokes fun at the idea of originality and authorship. Borges wasn't claiming to be Cervantes reincarnate. He was challenging the literary establishment with a wink and a nod, reminding us that context is everything. After all, if you're going to rewrite a classic, you might as well do it with panache. Now, onto a classic Borges anecdote that underscores the absurdity of life. Picture this: Borges at a conference, ready to deliver the keynote speech, only to be mistaken for a translator by the organizers. It's the kind of mix-up that sounds like it belongs in a slapstick comedy. Borges, with his characteristic wit, took it in stride, perhaps reflecting on how life itself is often stranger than fiction. The incident speaks volumes about the disconnect between perception and reality, something Borges himself explored in his writing. In a world where a literary titan could be mistaken for a mere functionary, the lines between the extraordinary and the mundane blur just a little more. As Borges' fame grew, so did his influence on the literary world. Yet, he remained a humble figure, often more interested in the worlds he created than his own celebrity. Borges was a man who sought the infinite in the everyday, finding depth in the mundane and mystery in the known. He had a knack for seeing what others missed, for exploring the spaces between the lines of life. His work was a reflection of a mind that saw beyond the obvious, an invitation to wander through the labyrinths of thought and imagination. As we wrap up this leg of Borges' journey, remember, his life and work are an exploration of the complex dance between reality and fiction, a tango of the mind that continues to captivate readers worldwide. Our journey with Borges is far from over, so stay tuned as we delve deeper into the enigma that is Jorge Luis Borges, where the only certainty is that nothing is as it seems. Borges' journey into the realm of global acclaim was as intricate as one of his own labyrinthine narratives. By the time he was edging towards his twilight years, Borges was about as blind as a bat in a coal mine. Yet, this hardly slowed him down. If anything, it amplified the mystical aura surrounding his work. It's like the universe handed him a blindfold and said, "Let's see what magic you can conjure now." And conjure he did. Despite the fact that Borges could barely discern shadows, his vision of literature was as sharp as ever, an irony not lost on the international literary community. Speaking of ironies, let's talk about Borges' curious case of fame. Abroad, he was heralded as a literary titan, while in his native Argentina, he was more of a well-kept secret. Imagine being celebrated in Parisian literary salons, while the folks back home barely recognize you in the local cafe. It's like being a rock star in Europe and a garage band in your hometown. This disparity in recognition is a classic tale of cultural and economic contrasts that defined Borges' era. Now, while Borges was busy weaving tales that would capture imaginations across continents, Buenos Aires was dancing to a tune of its own. In the mid-20th century, the city's cost of living was a roller coaster ride of inflation peaks and economic valleys. To give you a taste, in the 1940, a liter of milk might set you back just a few centavos, but fast forward to the 1970, and prices had ballooned like a hot air balloon on a windy day. Meanwhile, the global literary scene was exploding with post-war prosperity, making Buenos Aires' economic woes seem like the distant rumblings of a storm. Here's a juicy tidbit. Borges, who was often financially strapped, once publicly dismissed a prestigious literary prize, the Miguel de Cervantes Prize, saying it was irrelevant to real literary achievement. Fast forward to 1979, and guess who ends up receiving this very accolade? That's right, our dear Borges, who accepted it with the kind of wry humor you'd expect from someone who spent a lifetime exploring the absurdities of fate. It's the literary equivalent of saying you don't need dessert, and then being served the most decadent cake imaginable. Hard to resist, even if you had sworn it off. Argentina, during Borges' rise to fame, was a cauldron of political and social upheaval. The Persian years, with their populist policies and dramatic flair, were a tango of power and persuasion. Inflation was rampant, and while Borges crafted timeless tales, the Argentine peso was becoming about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, this chaos, Borges' works offered a portal to another realm, a place where economic woes could be momentarily forgotten in the pursuit of intellectual exploration. But let's not romanticize too much. Borges' life, like his stories, was riddled with paradoxes. Here's a man whose works are now studied in every university worth its salt, yet during his lifetime, he struggled with the practicalities of daily living. Blindness didn't just affect his reading and writing. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of human faculties. Yet, Borges embraced his condition with a stoic grace, relying on his mother and friends to transcribe his work. It's a testament to his resilience that he continued to produce masterpieces while the world around him blurred into indistinct shapes. As Borges' fame reached new heights, the economic landscape of Argentina was anything but stable. By the early 1980s, inflation rates were spiraling out of control, with annual rates hitting over 100%. Against this backdrop, Borges' work served as a kind of intellectual refuge, offering readers a taste of the infinite in a world that seemed increasingly finite. And while his international acclaim was undeniable, Borges remained a modest figure, more intrigued by the intricacies of a well-crafted sentence than by the trappings of fame. So, as we pause this chapter in Borges' life, let's reflect on the man who, despite near-total blindness, saw more clearly than most. His late life rise to international fame was not just a testament to his genius, but also a reminder of the strange, often ironic dance between recognition and obscurity. Borges' labyrinths were not just literary constructs. They were reflections of a world where the boundaries between reality and fiction are delightfully blurred. As we continue our journey with Borges, keep in mind that the greatest stories are often those that challenge our perceptions and invite us to wander through the infinite possibilities of the mind. Stay tuned as the enigma of Borges continues to unfold, one labyrinthine step at a time. So, as we lace up our shoes for the final steps in this literary tango with Jorge Luis Borges, let's confront the towering legacy of a man who saw more in the dark than most of us do in the light. Borges has left us with a treasure trove of narratives that continue to captivate, perplex, and inspire readers across the globe. But as with all legends, there's a fog of myth that surrounds his story, a haze we shall gladly wade through to find the glinting nuggets of truth. First off, Borges' contribution to Argentine literature is nothing short of monumental. His works, like Fictions and El Aleph, are the kind of stuff that makes you question your own existence after a late-night reading session, existential crises sold separately. In a country where literature often wrestled with the weight of national identity, Borges dared to transcend borders, crafting stories that were at once deeply rooted in Argentine culture and yet profoundly universal. He didn't just write about Argentina, he wrote about the universe, with Argentina as the starting point, a literary big bang, if you will. Now, onto the global stage. Borges' influence reached far beyond the dusty shelves of Buenos Aires libraries. In the grand theater of world literature, he was no mere supporting act. His narratives have spun threads through the works of writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Umberto Eco, and even Salman Rushdie. If literature were a dinner party, Borges would be the guest who shows up with a bottle of fine wine and leaves everyone questioning the nature of reality by dessert. His stories are like intellectual Brussels sprouts, deliciously complex and a little bitter, making you think long after you've savored them. But let's not get lost in the romantic fog of literary adulation. Borges' life was not a never-ending spiral of intellectual glamour. He often struggled with the financial realities of being a writer in a country where a peso's value was as unpredictable as the plot of a telenovela. His blindness, while adding a mystical aura to his persona, was a daily challenge. It's one thing to be a literary genius. It's another to be one when you can't see the paper you're supposed to be writing on. Yet, Borges found ways to adapt, dictating his stories to friends and family with a kind of wit and precision that made you forget the struggle behind the process. Now, let's tackle a myth that's as persistent as an overzealous mosquito. The idea that Borges was some sort of aloof, ivory tower intellectual, disconnected from the world. Sure, he was a thinker, a man whose head was permanently in the clouds, and not the fluffy, harmless kind, but the stormy, enigmatic ones. But Borges was no stranger to the gritty realities of life. He worked as a public librarian, dealt with bureaucratic absurdities, and lived through the political upheavals of 20th century Argentina. His fiction was not an escape from reality, but a deep dive into its complexities. He used his stories to explore the labyrinthine nature of human existence, where the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary was as blurred as a watercolor painting left out in the rain. And what about Borges standing today? Well, modern audiences find themselves just as enthralled by his works as those who first read them in the mid-20th century. His influence has seeped into pop culture in ways that would likely amuse him. You'll find traces of Borges in everything from films that tinker with reality, think Inception and its dream within a dream concept, to TV shows that play with narrative structure, like Westworld. It's as if Borges left us all a puzzle, and we're still trying to piece it together, one enigmatic story at a time. Yet, despite his profound influence, Borges never fell into the trap of taking himself too seriously. He had a knack for self-deprecating humor, once remarking that the only thing his blindness prevented him from doing was reading his own books. It's a poignant reminder that behind the literary giant was a man who understood the absurdity of life all too well. As much as he explored the labyrinths of the mind, Borges was aware that sometimes the most profound truths are wrapped in the simplest of jokes. So, what do we make of Borges' legacy? In a world that's constantly changing, where the lines between fact and fiction are often blurred by the whims of technology and media, Borges remains a beacon of literary brilliance. His stories invite us to question our perceptions, to explore the infinite possibilities of thought, and to embrace the mystery of existence. Borges didn't just write stories. He crafted universes, each one a challenge to the reader to see beyond the surface and delve into the depths of meaning. As we close this chapter on Borges, remember that his legacy is not just in the words he left behind, but in the questions he dared us to ask. In a universe of infinite libraries, endless labyrinths, and cosmic alephs, Borges stands as a guide, a reminder that the journey through the mind's eye is as important as any physical voyage. So, the next time you find yourself lost in thought, wandering through the endless corridors of your imagination, take a moment to thank Borges for reminding us that the true adventure lies in the labyrinths we create and navigate in our own minds. The sun peaks over the horizon, casting a golden glow on Carthage, the grand city that's got more hustle and bustle than a modern-day stock exchange. You're standing in the middle of it all, and by standing, I mean you've just rolled out of your straw bed on the floor of a cramped room. Welcome to your morning as a Roman slave in the 2nd century version of a metropolis. Forget snooze buttons. Your day kicks off with the chirping of birds and the distant, unmistakable clamor of traders setting up their stalls. Now, Carthage is no sleepy hollow. It's a buzzing center of commerce, and you, my friend, are a cog in this massive economic machine. As a slave, your life is tied to the ebb and flow of this bustling economy. It might not sound glamorous, but let's face it, neither is being stuck in traffic during rush hour. Here's the scoop. The city, with its strategic location along the Mediterranean, is a hotbed for trade. Think of it as the Amazon of antiquity, with goods like grain, wine, and olive oil coming in and out at a dizzying pace. And while we're on the subject, let's talk numbers. Olive oil is a staple, and back in the day, it could cost around 6 denarii for a modius. That's about 8. 7 liters to you and me. But let's zoom in on the role you play. Slaves like you are the backbone of this economy, performing tasks from fetching water to managing entire estates, depending on your owner's wealth, or lack thereof. If you're lucky, you might find yourself in a relatively cushy position indoors, perhaps attending to domestic duties in a wealthy Roman's villa. Less fortunate, you're out in the fields, toiling under the scorching sun, or maybe slogging away in one of the many workshops dotting the city, crafting pottery or textiles. Now, let's smash a few myths while we're at it. The notion of the noble slave life is about as real as unicorns. Sure, some slaves, usually those with specialized skills, could earn their freedom or even rise to positions of influence. But for most, life was a grind. It's not the rags-to-riches story you hear about in bedtime tales. The reality is harsher, like a cold splash of water to the face. Slavery is a brutal institution, yet it's integral to the fabric of society here. Your labor is not just a contribution, it's a necessity for the city's survival. So, what's on today's agenda? Well, if you're in service at a villa, you might start by lighting the fire, preparing breakfast, and maybe even running errands. Did someone say, fetch the olive oil? Meanwhile, if you're in the fields, you're probably looking at a full day of planting or harvesting, depending on the season. And it's not just back-breaking work, it's precision labor. Get it wrong, and you're likely to hear about it in no uncertain terms from your overseer. If you're in the markets, you might be helping your owner sell goods, or perhaps you're part of the labor force that unloads ships at the bustling harbor. The port of Carthage is a marvel. Ships from all corners of the Mediterranean dock here, and every arrival brings a fresh wave of activity. It's a bit like watching a never-ending game of Tetris, with crates and barrels being shuffled around with impressive efficiency. Economically speaking, the city's thriving, and while that might sound great, remember that you're not the one pocketing the profits. The average skilled slave could be bought for around 500 denarii, a hefty sum when you consider that a Roman soldier earned about 225 denarii a year. Your value isn't just in your labor, it's in your life, something that's both unsettling and sobering. And here's a kicker. Even though you're at the bottom rung of the social ladder, your work is what keeps the entire edifice from crumbling. It's a paradox that's as old as time. Those with the least power often hold the most responsibility. As you go about your day, remember that while legends might gloss over the gritty details of slave life, the reality is a tapestry woven with the threads of endurance and survival. So, gear up. The sun's climbing higher and there's work to be done. And as the sun continues its relentless climb, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of your life as a Roman slave. It's not just about hard work and calloused hands. There's a pecking order that could rival your office politics. The slave hierarchy. Yes, even among slaves, there's a hierarchy is as complex as the Roman legal system itself. At the top of the pyramid are the household slaves, the ones who serve their masters directly. Think of them as the executive assistants of the ancient world. If you're fetching wine for a senator, you're probably higher up the chain than someone slogging it out in the fields. But hold on, let's not romanticize this. Being a household slave might mean less sunburn, but it doesn't exempt you from the whims of your master. The power dynamics are as unpredictable as a Roman chariot race. Today you might be in favor, tomorrow you might be out on your ear, or worse. Then there are the skilled slaves, the artisans and craftsmen whose talents make them more valuable. These folks might even earn a stipend, a few denarii here and there, which could be saved up toward buying their freedom. Yes, you heard that right. Freedom is on the menu, but it's a pricey dish. This brings us to the Roman concept of manumission, the process by which a slave could become a freedman. It's like the ultimate promotion, but with strings attached. Freedmen didn't just walk away scot-free. They often continued to work for their former masters as clients. It's not exactly a clean break, more like switching cubicles while still answering to the same boss. But hey, it beats being sold off at the next estate auction. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room, the notion of the kindly master. Spoiler alert, this is often more myth than reality. Sure, there were laws in place, like the Lex Petronia, which put some limits on cruelty. But don't get too excited. Just because a law exists doesn't mean it's enforced. Masters had the power of life and death over their slaves, and legal recourse was about as rare as a solar eclipse. Your rights as a slave were barely a footnote in the grand scroll of Roman law. But let's not throw the toga out with the bathwater. There were instances where slaves could rise through the ranks. Take Tyro, for instance, the personal secretary to Cicero, the famed Roman statesman. Tyro was eventually freed, and went on to make significant contributions to literature, even inventing a form of shorthand. So yes, there's a glimmer of hope, but it's more of a candle in a hurricane than a lighthouse guiding you to shore. Meanwhile, back to your day-to-day. You're likely rubbing shoulders with other slaves, each with their own story. Some might have been born into slavery, others captured in battle, and a few might even be debt slaves, having sold themselves to pay off a hefty tab. And while you're all in this together, the camaraderie is often overshadowed by the ever-present reality that one of you could be sold off at a moment's notice. It's a bit like living in a reality TV show where the stakes are life and limb. Economically, you're a cog in the grand machine of Roman commerce. Your labor contributes to the booming trade of Carthage, a city that's as lively as it is lucrative. And while the denarii flow, they're not flowing into your pocket. Instead, you're like an unsung hero, except without the heroic recognition part. It's a reality that's as stark as the midday sun. And while legends might paint a rosy picture of slave life, the truth is as gritty as the dust on your feet. As you juggle your morning tasks, from lighting fires to fetching olive oil, remember that you're not just working for survival. You're upholding an economic system that's as vast as the Mediterranean itself. Every denarius made and every trade route secured is built on the backs of those like you. It's a paradox that highlights the irony of history. Those who toil the hardest often reap the fewest rewards. So, as you navigate the crowded streets and bustling markets of Carthage, keep in mind the complex legal framework that governs your existence. You're living proof of the Roman Empire's reliance on slavery, a system that's as flawed as it is foundational. The sun might be climbing higher, but your day is far from over, and the history of Roman slavery is a tapestry yet to be fully unraveled. But let's shift gears as the sun creeps higher above Carthage, casting a spotlight on the tangled web of social dynamics that define your world. Being a Roman slave in this bustling city means you're not just another face in the crowd. You're part of a complex society where lines blur between slaves, freedmen, and freemen. Think of it as the original game of social Jenga, where each move could topple your precarious balance. Here's the scoop. In 2nd century Carthage, social mingling isn't just a pastime, it's a necessity. You'll find yourself brushing elbows with everyone from fellow slaves to merchant-class freedmen who have managed to buy their freedom, often at a steep price. Mind you, the going rate for freedom, you're looking at a hefty sum, possibly around 500 denarii, enough to buy a small plot of land or a modest home if you're lucky. Now, let's talk about those freedmen. They're like the middle management of Roman society, no longer slaves, but not quite part of the elite club either. They've got the freedom to own property, marry legally, and even start a business, but don't break out the confetti just yet. They're still tethered to their former masters through a patron-client relationship, which is about as binding as a modern-day, ironclad non-compete clause. Despite their newfound freedom, freedmen often find themselves navigating a minefield of expectations and obligations. It's a bit like being given a key to the city, but finding out it only opens half the doors. Sure, they can own a shop or a tavern, but when it comes to real political power, they're as sidelined as a Roman chariot without wheels. The Senate, off-limits. High offices, keep dreaming. Now here's a kicker. Social mobility is less of a staircase and more of a slippery slope. For slaves, the prospect of freedom is like a carrot on a stick, tantalizing, but perpetually out of reach for most. And yet, it's this very possibility that keeps the wheels of Roman society turning. It's a bizarre form of hope, one that's as fragile as a glass amphora in a bustling market. Speaking of markets, let's not forget the freemen, those born free, yet often living hand-to-mouth. They are the artisans, the small-time traders, and the laborers who hustle day in and day out. While they might not have the chains of slavery weighing them down, they're bound by the economic chains of survival. It's a paradox worthy of a Roman philosopher's musings. As you navigate this labyrinth of social ties, let's take a breather and dive into the cultural backdrop that defines Carthage under Roman rule. This city is a melting pot of influences, blending Punic traditions with Roman customs. It's a place where temples dedicated to Roman gods coexist with shrines honoring Baal Hammon and Tanit, the deities of old Carthage. Religion here is both a societal pressure valve and a communal escape. For you, religion might offer a rare respite from the daily grind. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and public games are more than just distractions. They're community glue, binding disparate groups together in common celebration, or at least momentary distraction. Picture this. The streets alive with the colors of the festival, the air thick with the scent of incense and roasted meats, and for a few precious hours, the rigid social hierarchies seem to blur, if only for a moment. Public games, particularly the gladiatorial contests, are the ancient world's equivalent of a blockbuster movie, a spectacle that draws crowds from all walks of life. These games are as much about politics as they are about entertainment. Emperors and local bigwigs use them to curry favor with the masses, a tactic as old as time itself. Bread and circuses, folks, were the original PR strategy. Now, let's bust a myth or two. The idea of gladiators fighting for glory is about as romanticized as a Hollywood rom-com. The reality, it's brutal, bloody, and often a death sentence. Gladiators, many of whom are slaves or condemned criminals, fight not for honor, but for survival. Sure, a few lucky ones might earn their freedom through skill and sheer luck, but for most, it's a grim dance with death. For the spectators, though, these games are a chance to indulge in some good old-fashioned escapism. They're a diversion from the harsh realities of life, a way to forget, even if just for a while, the struggles of daily existence. It's the same reason we binge-watch series today, an ancient version of pressing pause on life. As you stand shoulder to shoulder with freemen, freedmen, and fellow slaves in the amphitheater, the air electric with anticipation, you're momentarily part of something larger. It's a fleeting sense of unity, a brief respite from the chains of servitude and the grind of survival. But as the games draw to a close and the crowds disperse, the social divisions snap back into place, like a rubber band stretched too far. So, as you weave through the cultural tapestry of Carthage, remember this. You're part of a world that's as diverse as it is divided, a city where history, economy, and culture collide. Your life, though marked by toil and hardship, is also interwoven with moments of shared humanity and fleeting escape. The sun may be high, but your day is far from over, and the story of your life in Roman Carthage is a chapter still being written. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over Carthage, the city's heartbeat quickens with the rhythm of commerce. The trade market is alive, an ancient symphony of sounds and smells. Here, Carthage is in its element, a bustling hub where the Mediterranean's finest mingle with local fare. It's like a living, breathing infographic of the ancient economy, albeit one that smells distinctly of fish and spices. Now, let's dive into the logistics that make this market more than just a chaotic cluster of stalls. Picture the Mediterranean as a massive game board, with Carthage as a critical square. Trade routes snake across it like intricate webbing, connecting distant lands in a network that would make a modern logistics manager green with envy. From the Iberian Peninsula to the Levant, goods flow into Carthage with the efficiency of a Roman aqueduct. We're talking grain from Sicily, wine from Gaul, and exotic spices from the east. It's a smorgasbord of ancient delicacies, each with a price tag that could rival a luxury brand today. And who's making all this magic happen? That's right, slaves. Your labor is the grease in the wheels of this economic machine. Whether you're unloading ships, tallying goods, or hawking wares, your efforts keep the denarii rolling. And speaking of denarii, let's talk numbers. A modius of grain might fetch around 3 denarii, while a jug of fine wine could set someone back 15 denarii. That's a lot of bread and circus money, my friend. But before you start dreaming of olive oil fortunes, let's puncture a popular myth, the prosperous merchant class. Sure, the image of a wealthy merchant presiding over his empire of goods is tempting, but for most, it's as much a fantasy as flying chariots. The reality, profit margins are slim, and competition is fiercer than a gladiatorial match. Many merchants are barely scraping by, their wealth more facade than fact. It's a reminder that even those freeborn aren't immune to the economic grind. Now, let's put a pin in the myth that Carthage is some egalitarian paradise of economic opportunity. The disparities here could make modern income inequality blush. The merchant class might own ships and stalls, but they're often drowning in debt, beholden to wealthy patrons or moneylenders. It's a bit like being handed the keys to a luxury villa only to find out the mortgage is astronomical. On top of that, taxes levied by Roman officials can be as unpredictable as a summer storm, further squeezing the wallets of those trying to make an honest denarius. And let's not forget the freemen, the so-called middle class of Roman society. They're the artisans and small traders who keep Carthage ticking. But while they might be free in name, their economic reality is often anything but. Many live in cramped quarters, their livelihoods as precarious as a juggler's act. Sure, they're not slaves, but financial freedom is a distant dream, as elusive as a mirage in the desert. They're the unsung backbone of the city, yet they walk a tightrope, always one misstep away from ruin. So, as you navigate this marketplace, dodging pushy traders and the occasional runaway chicken, remember this. Carthage's economic engine is powered by the sweat of many, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. It's a tale as old as trade itself, where the promise of prosperity is often just that, a promise, not a guarantee. And while we're on the subject of promises, let's address the role of slaves in this grand economic saga. You're not just manual labor, you're human capital. That's right, the ancient world's version of an asset. Your skills, whether in crafting, trading, or managing, are valued and exploited to keep the economy humming. Yet, in a twist of irony, the very system you sustain offers you little in return. Freedom, for most, is a carrot on a stick, tantalizingly close but perpetually out of grasp. As the sun dips lower, casting an amber glow over the market, take in the scene, the clatter of coin, the hum of bargaining voices, and the scent of opportunity mixed with desperation. It's a microcosm of Roman Carthage, a city where dreams and realities converge, often at odds but inextricably linked. Here, the legend of prosperity meets the gritty reality of economic survival, an age-old dance that continues to play out in marketplaces around the world. And as the market begins to wind down, with traders packing up and shadows lengthening, remember that this is just one chapter in the sprawling epic of Carthage. Tomorrow will bring new faces, fresh goods, and the same relentless drive for profit and survival. So, keep your head up, and your wits sharper than a Roman gladius. For in this city, the only constant is change. And with that, our exploration of Carthage's economic marvels and myths is far from over. There's still more to uncover as we inch closer to the heart of this ancient metropolis. As the last vendors pack away their goods, and the market's din fades into a sleepy hum, Carthage begins its nightly transformation. The city that roared like a lion in the daylight now purrs like a satisfied cat. But don't for a moment think that this means the workday is over for everyone. For many Roman slaves, The night is just another chapter in their relentless cycle of toil and endurance. Let's talk about the quiet acts of defiance that are the unsung stories of slave life. Subtle resistance is a fine art, like painting with invisible ink. We're not talking full-blown Spartacus-style revolts here, though those did happen, and more on that later. Instead, picture a slave deliberately breaking a tool to steal a few moments of respite, or whispering forbidden tales of hope during the hushed hours of night. These are the small rebellions, the everyday acts of courage that don't make it into the grand scrolls of history, but keep the flame of dignity flickering. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes those flickers catch fire. Take the Servile Wars, for instance. The most famous of these being the Third Servile War, led by the one and only Spartacus, around 73-71 BCE. This gladiator-turned-rebel managed to rally an army of over 70,000 slaves, shaking the Roman Republic to its core. Sure, it ended in a brutal crackdown, but the fact that it happened at all speaks volumes about the simmering discontent beneath Rome's polished veneer. It's proof that even the most ironclad systems can crack under pressure. But for every Spartacus, there were countless others whose acts of defiance were more muted, yet equally significant. You've got slaves who intentionally messed up tasks, knowing full well it could result in punishment. Why? Because it was a statement, a way to assert some form of individuality in a world that saw them as mere property. It's a testament to human resilience, finding ways to say, I am, when the world insists on defining you as you are owned. And let's not forget the slaves who used the system's own rules to their advantage. Manumission, the legal process of freeing a slave, was a double-edged sword. While it was often used as a reward for loyalty or exceptional service, savvy slaves could sometimes negotiate their freedom, leveraging their skills or connections to gain favor. Picture it as a high-stakes game of chess, where the pieces are human lives and every move counts. The economic reality of Roman Carthage, or any Roman city for that matter, was heavily dependent on this intricate dance between control and rebellion. Slavery was the engine that powered the Roman economy, but it was an engine prone to backfiring. Slaves were everywhere, domestic workers, artisans, miners, and even teachers. The Roman elite, ever pragmatic, knew they had to maintain a delicate balance of fear and incentive to keep the system running smoothly. Now, what did all this mean for Roman society? Well, it left an indelible mark that echoes through history like a haunting refrain. The reliance on slavery created a hierarchy so rigid that even freedmen found themselves tethered to their former masters. The Roman concept of freedom was a complex beast. It was granted, not inherent, and came with strings attached. Former slaves became clients to their patrons, caught in a web of obligations that blurred the lines between freedom and servitude. The legacy of Roman slavery is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the human cost of economic prosperity. It's a stark reflection on the nature of freedom and the lengths to which societies will go to maintain a status quo that benefits the few at the expense of the many. The Roman Empire, for all its grandeur, was built on the backs of those whose names history forgot, yet whose labor was immortalized in every stone and sculpture. Fast forward to today, and the shadow of this ancient institution still looms large. Our modern understanding of human rights owes much to the lessons learned from Rome's past. The abolition of slavery, the ongoing struggle for civil rights, and the fight against economic inequality all carry echoes of a time when human life was commodified in the name of progress. It's a sobering reminder that the march toward justice is ongoing, a marathon that began long before the first Roman soldier set foot in Carthage. As the evening deepens, casting the city in soft moonlight, consider this. Carthage, with its bustling markets and intricate social web, was more than just a place on a map. It was a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a city where legends were written by the victors, but the stories of quiet resistance and unyielding hope continue to whisper through the ages. The history of slavery in Rome is not just about chains and shackles. It's about the enduring quest for dignity and freedom, a quest that remains as relevant today as it was 2 millennia ago. So, as you drift into sleep, let these stories linger. Let them remind you that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a collection of lives lived in defiance of oppression. And while the city of Carthage may no longer stand in its ancient glory, its lessons endure, etched into the fabric of our collective consciousness. The journey of understanding, of empathy and justice, is far from over. But every step forward is a tribute to those who, against all odds, dared to dream of a better world. As the night embraces the city, let these truths settle in, a quiet, yet powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the grand theatre of ancient history, few civilizations had the flair for the dramatic quite like the Maya. Picture, if you will, a land where the earth is a canvas and limestone is the paint. We're talking about the Yucatan Peninsula, a place so flat you could drop a tortilla and watch it roll to the sea without a hitch. This is the backdrop for the Maya's architectural symphony, a civilization strutting its stuff between roughly 250 and 900 AD, when Europe was still figuring out that bathing wasn't an optional activity. Now, the Maya weren't just throwing up a few huts and calling it a day. No, they were crafting stone symphonies, each city-state vying for the title of greatest hits of the Maya world. Tikal, Palenque, Capan, and Calakmul, each a contender in this stony showdown, with grand plazas, towering temples, and palaces that dared to touch the sky. It was the Mesoamerican version of Manhattan, minus the yellow cabs, and with a lot more jaguar motifs. The Maya had a knack for using what was at hand, and fortunately for them, the Yucatan is a veritable limestone buffet. This soft rock was the perfect material for creating their architectural masterpieces, which they then covered with stucco to add a smooth, polished finish. Imagine constructing a skyscraper with a shovel and a dream. No modern machinery to hoist your hopes skyward, just a lot of elbow grease and maybe a bit of divine intervention. The tallest of these structures, like the pyramid at Tikal, soared to heights of over 200 feet, a staggering feat in a world where the wheel was more of a philosophical concept than a practical invention. But why go to such lengths? In the Maya world, architecture was about more than just shelter from the rain. It was a statement, a flex of power and piety. The city-states were like rival rock bands, each trying to outdo the other with their own epic stone anthems. Tikal might have had the towering Temple Roman IV, but Palenque could boast the sophisticated palace with its iconic tower, the Maya equivalent of a mic drop. Of course, this was all happening in a political landscape as tangled as a ball of yarn after a cat's been at it. The Maya civilization was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own king, its own gods, and most importantly, its own ego. They would form alliances as easily as they would break them, all in the pursuit of power and influence. Warfare was as common as a summer thunderstorm, with rulers seeking to expand their influence by any means necessary, including a bit of good old-fashioned headhunting. The Maya weren't just architects of stone, they were architects of their society, crafting a world where religion, politics, and the cosmos were inextricably linked. Their cities were designed to reflect this cosmic order, with temples and plazas aligned to the movements of the stars. It was a celestial game of chess, with the gods as players and the kings as their pawns. The result, a civilization that left an indelible mark on history, even if they occasionally lost track of where they buried the calendar. These monumental constructions weren't just for show, either. They served as centers of power, places of worship, and stages for the political theater that was the Maya world. The rulers of these city-states didn't just want to be remembered for their conquests. They wanted their legacy etched in stone, towering over the jungle canopy long after they had turned to dust. But the Maya's architectural prowess wasn't all sunshine and sacrificial altars. It came at a cost, both in terms of labor and resources. Building these colossal structures required a workforce that could rival the population of a small town, with artisans, laborers, and slaves working tirelessly under the watchful eyes of overseers. It's a wonder they managed to get anything done, given the logistical nightmare of transporting stone blocks without the aid of pack animals or wheeled vehicles. Yet they did it, and in doing so, carved out a legacy that still stands today, even if the jungle has reclaimed much of their work. The Maya civilization was a tapestry of contradictions, where the sublime and the brutal wove together to create a society that was as complex as it was captivating. Their architectural wonders were a testament to their ingenuity and ambition, a legacy of stone that continues to inspire awe and admiration. So next time you find yourself staring up at a skyscraper, spare a thought for the Maya, the original architects of the impossible, who dared to touch the sky long before elevators made it easy. So, let's delve into the nitty-gritty of Maya construction techniques, a masterclass in ancient engineering that might just make your modern contractor break into a sweat. At the heart of this architectural sorcery was the corbel arch, a Maya specialty that was essentially their version of dropping the mic. Picture a stone sandwich with each slice slightly overlapping the last. No arches as we know them, just gravity-defying stacks of ambition and limestone. Forget about Roman arches. The Maya didn't have time for such basic geometry. They were busy bending the rules of physics like it was just another Tuesday. Now, you might be wondering how this all came together without the convenience of cranes or even the humble wheel. Well, the Maya labor force was robust, to say the least. Imagine organizing a crew of thousands of workers, artisans, and maybe a few unlucky captives. The workforce was a mix of free laborers and those who probably wished they had a better union. It was a scene reminiscent of a modern-day construction site, minus OSHA regulations, and with a lot more Jaguar-themed accessories. And let's talk economics, because these stone symphonies didn't come cheap. Crafting these monumental structures required not just manpower, but also a staggering amount of resources. Limestone, the Maya's building block of choice, was abundant, but not exactly lightweight. Hauling these blocks to construction sites involved a human-powered relay race that would make an Ironman triathlon look like a casual stroll. The logistics were a nightmare, yet somehow they managed to keep the stone train rolling without a single wheel in sight. But who footed the bill for these grand projects? Spoiler alert, it wasn't the guys wearing the feathered headdresses. The funding came from the very foundations of Maya society, tribute and taxes. City-states demanded offerings from their subjects, which were often paid in goods, labor, or, if you were really unlucky, as a sacrificial stand-in. It was an economy built on the back of the people, quite literally, with the elite reaping the benefits while the common folk did the heavy lifting. The Maya elite were the original influencers, and their lavish lifestyles were funded by a pyramid scheme of epic proportions. Pun absolutely intended. So, what did it mean to have a Maya calendar appointment with a builder? Well, let's just say you needed the patience of a saint and the foresight of a prophet. The Maya calendar was a marvel of astronomical precision, but when it came to construction timelines, things were a bit more flexible. Imagine scheduling a meeting and being told that your contractor would show up sometime between the next solar cycle and the end of the Bacton. That's about 394 years, in case you're wondering. It was a system that would drive any modern project manager to tears. Despite the challenges, the Maya managed to pull off some of the most awe-inspiring architectural feats in history. Take the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, an extraordinary structure that housed the tomb of the mighty ruler Pakal the Great. This wasn't just a final resting place. It was a testament to the Maya's ability to combine art, religion, and engineering into a single, breathtaking package. The temple is adorned with intricate carvings and hieroglyphs, telling stories of cosmic battles and divine ancestors, a kind of ancient comic strip carved in stone. The economic implications of these constructions were profound. They were more than just physical manifestations of power. They were the engines driving the Maya economy. Building projects kept the wheels of commerce turning, from the quarry workers to the artisans crafting stucco decorations. It was a self-sustaining cycle that reinforced the social hierarchy and kept the elite in their feathered glory. But let's not romanticize it too much. For the average Maya citizen, life was a grind. While the kings and priests were busy aligning their temples with the stars, the common folk were toiling away under the blistering sun, their contributions to these architectural wonders often going unrecognized. It's a reminder that even the most glorious civilizations have their dark underbellies, where the glitter of gold masks the sweat and toil of those who built it. As we continue our journey through Maya architecture, remember that these structures weren't just static relics. They were living, breathing centers of social, political, and religious life. Each stone was a piece of a larger puzzle, a testament to the ingenuity of a civilization that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And as the jungle slowly reclaims these ancient sites, we're left with the indelible impression of a people who, despite the odds, reached for the stars and carved their legacy into the very fabric of the earth. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover in the Maya's architectural saga. The Maya's architectural saga is in many ways like a cosmic soap opera, with temples playing starring roles, not just as places to appease the gods, but as celestial observatories, connecting the terrestrial with the astral. Imagine having a building that doubles as a calendar, telescope, and GPS, all in one limestone package. But here's the kicker. Not every pyramid was a cosmic decoder ring. Sometimes, a pyramid was just a colossal mound of rock designed to show off a king's bling or a city's swagger. Now, let's dive into the real eye-catcher, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. This isn't just any old pyramid, it's a stone symphony of astronomical precision. With each side facing a cardinal direction, the temple is a testament to the Mayas' astronomical prowess. During the equinoxes, a shadow serpent slithers down the pyramid steps, a celestial light show that would make even the most jaded Instagrammer whip out their phone. But before we get lost in the romance of the descending snake, let's pause to appreciate the sheer mathematical genius behind it. The pyramid's 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, plus the top platform, tally up to 365, the exact number of days in the year. Coincidence? Hardly. This was cosmic engineering at its finest. Despite the allure of these celestial wonders, not every pyramid was an astronomical gadget. Some were more like the ancient world's version of a vanity project, built to house the remains of the mighty or serve as altars for offerings. For every temple of Kukulkan, there were countless pyramids that were less about predicting the solstice and more about proclaiming, "Check out how powerful I am." Think of it as the difference between the Hubble telescope and a really big billboard. Both are impressive, but only one is aimed at the stars. Speaking of stars, the Mayas' fascination with the heavens wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-time gig. Their priests were the original stargazers, spending more time peering at the night sky than a teenager scrolling through TikTok. These celestial observations were crucial not only for agricultural planning, but also for maintaining social order. If the stars said it was time for a new king, well, who were they to argue? This cosmic choreography was key to maintaining the social hierarchy, where the elite claimed divine legitimacy that made their rule as indisputable as gravity itself. The architectural layout of Maya cities was a reflection of these power dynamics, a stone-cold map of who was who in the societal pecking order. Temples and palaces were strategically placed to align with celestial events, but they also served as a daily reminder of the king's divine right to rule. The elite lived literally and figuratively above the commoners, their residences perched high on platforms, as if to say, "We're closer to the gods than you are." It was a social hierarchy as rigid as the limestone blocks that built it, and breaking through, it was about as likely as a stone pyramid taking flight. Now, let's draw a parallel to today's corporate skyscrapers. Just as the Maya elite built upward to flaunt their power, modern corporations erect steel and glass towers to assert their dominance on the urban skyline. Both are tangible manifestations of power, visible from miles away, and both serve to remind the world of who holds the purse strings. The difference, the Maya did it with limestone and manpower, while today it's all about cranes and capital. But let's not forget the everyday folks who actually made these monumental constructions possible. The laborers, artisans, and slaves who toiled under the sun were the unsung heroes of Maya architecture. Their sweat and blood were the mortar that held these grand structures together, even if their names never made it into the history books. While the elite basked in the glory of their architectural legacies, the commoners were left to marvel at the stars from their humble huts, dreaming of a better life in the next world. If only the priests would let them in on the secret of how to get there. Debunking the myth of the calendar pyramid leaves us with a more nuanced understanding of Maya architecture. The reality is that these structures were as diverse in function as they were in form. Some were celestial observatories, others tombs, and many were straightforwardly political, designed to project power and instill awe. The romance of the cosmic calendar is captivating, but the truth is often more complex, and dare I say, more interesting. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Maya architecture, remember that each stone laid was a piece of a larger puzzle, a testament to a civilization that dared to dream as big as the cosmos itself. And while the myths add a layer of mystique, the reality, infused with human ambition, ingenuity, and hierarchy is where the true story lies. We've only just scratched the surface, so hold onto your feathered headdress. There's more celestial intrigue and architectural drama to come. As we navigate away from the celestial intrigue of Maya pyramids, let's pull our focus down to Earth, quite literally, and explore the marvel that was Maya urban planning. If you've ever found yourself lost in a concrete jungle, cursing the city planners, who apparently prioritized chaos over coherence, you might just develop a newfound appreciation for the ancient Maya. These folks laid out their cities with a precision that would make any modern urban planner reconsider their life choices. Think of a Maya city as an ancient blueprint for sustainable living, an eco-friendly utopia before green was a buzzword. These urban centers weren't just a random assortment of temples and plazas. They were carefully orchestrated symphonies of structure, agriculture, and water management. In an environment where drought could be as common as a bad haircut, the Maya mastered the art of water management with an ingenuity that rivals modern technology. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. Most Maya cities, including the likes of Tikal and Paling, were nestled in areas that made today's urban sprawl look like a game of Tetris, played by someone with a vendetta against straight lines. They capitalized on natural resources with the finesse of a culinary master using every part of the buffalo. The Maya understood that water was life, and their cities were like elaborate board games, strategically designed to capture and store every precious drop of rain. Forget your rain barrels. The Maya had reservoirs and cisterns that could fill a modern-day swimming pool faster than you could say climate change. Take the city of Tikal, for instance. Situated in the dense jungles of northern Guatemala, Tikal wasn't plopped down haphazardly. Its layout was a masterclass in urban planning, featuring a series of causeways connecting various parts of the city, allowing for efficient movement and trade. But the real genius lay in its water management system. Tikal's inhabitants dug massive reservoirs to collect rainwater, ensuring a steady supply even during dry spells. This wasn't just survival, it was sustainable living centuries ahead of its time. And let's not overlook agriculture, the bread and butter, or maize and beans, if we're being culturally accurate, of any thriving civilization. The Maya didn't have the luxury of vast open plains, so they innovated. Cue the raised fields and terracing, techniques that maximized arable land and prevented soil erosion, something today's industrial farmers might want to take notes on. The Maya were essentially running an organic farm-to-table operation before Whole Foods was a twinkle in Jeff Bezos's eye. But here's the twist in our tale of agricultural and urban harmony. The Maya's very success may have sown the seeds of their downfall. As cities grew and populations swelled, the demands on the environment increased exponentially. Deforestation became rampant as trees were cleared to make way for more farmland and to fuel the fires needed for lime production, crucial for construction. It's a classic case of living beyond one's means, and in the end, the environment became less like a benevolent provider and more like a vengeful landlord demanding payment. Ironically, while the Maya were orchestrating these elaborate urban masterpieces, they were also setting the stage for environmental mismanagement on a grand scale. It's a cautionary tale as old as civilization itself, the delicate balance between human ambition and ecological sustainability. The Maya, for all their brilliance, were not immune to the environmental pitfalls that can accompany unchecked growth. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the very innovations that propel a society forward can also pull it back. In this light, the downfall of the Maya civilization becomes less of a mystery and more of a tragic inevitability. It's not that they didn't see it coming, it's that the momentum of their success was too powerful to stop. As resources dwindled and environmental degradation intensified, social tensions rose, and the once great city-states began to crumble under their own weight. The jungle that had once been their ally became an insatiable force, reclaiming the land with a quiet, relentless persistence. Contrast this with today's urban sprawl, where cities expand like amoebas on a petri dish, consuming land and resources with little regard for the future. The Maya's tale is a poignant reminder of the consequences of neglecting sustainability, a lesson as relevant now as it was 1,000 years ago. While we might not be building limestone pyramids or aligning our cities with celestial events, the underlying challenges remain eerily similar. So, the next time you're stuck in traffic, surrounded by a sea of concrete and exhaust fumes, take a moment to reflect on the Maya. They were master planners, visionaries who understood the importance of harmony between human endeavor and the natural world. Their cities were not just places to live. They were vibrant communities that thrived on innovation and sustainability. Yet, even they fell victim to the very forces they sought to control. It's a sobering thought, and one that should give us pause as we continue to shape our own urban landscapes. As we continue our journey through the incredible world of the Maya, remember that their story is not just a chapter in the past, but a cautionary tale for the future. Their legacy is etched in stone, a testament to their ingenuity and ambition, and a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and preservation. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the mysteries of Maya civilization, exploring the cultural, political, and social forces that shaped their world and ours. Despite the Maya's eventual decline, their architectural legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition that transcends time. These ancient structures, with their intricate designs and celestial alignments, often outshine modern buildings that sometimes struggle to survive a decade without a maintenance meltdown. While contemporary architects wrestle with building codes and zoning laws, the Maya were busy crafting monuments that could withstand the relentless march of time and the occasional tropical storm. Let's talk durability. Maya structures have stood tall for over a millennium, a feat that would make any modern contractor break out in a cold sweat. The secret, it's all in the materials and methods. The Maya didn't have access to steel beams or concrete mixers, but they did have limestone, a rock so prolific in the Yucatan that it was practically their version of Lego bricks. They shaped and stacked these stones with a precision that didn't just defy gravity, but also defied the passage of time. Today's architects could take a leaf out of the Maya's book on how to build something to last. But it wasn't just about engineering prowess. The Maya's architectural achievements were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the cosmos, society, and environment. They built not just for utility, but for eternity. Each temple, pyramid, and palace was a statement of cultural identity, a physical manifestation of their worldview, and a bridge between the human and the divine. This blend of practicality and spirituality is something modern architecture often lacks, as we chase after fleeting trends and disposable designs. Fast forward to today, you can see the echoes of Maya architecture in modern designs. Take the iconic pyramid shape. It's been co-opted by everything from luxury hotels to corporate headquarters, a testament to its timeless appeal. But while our modern versions are often more about aesthetic flair than structural necessity, the Maya pyramids were the real deal, a fusion of form and function that served as both calendar and compass. It's a reminder that good design doesn't just look impressive. It serves a purpose and stands the test of time. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or should I say, the serpent in the pyramid. We're talking about the infamous 2012 Maya calendar prediction. Spoiler alert, the world didn't end, and the Maya never actually prophesied our collective doom. This myth was a classic case of misinterpretation, where the end of a long-count calendar cycle was mistaken for an apocalyptic event. Imagine if every time your calendar flipped to a new year, you expected the universe to implode. It's a little dramatic, even for those of us who suffer from a New Year hangover. The real story is far less cataclysmic and much more intriguing. The Maya had a sophisticated understanding of time, one that saw history as cyclical rather than linear. Their calendar wasn't forecasting an end, but marking a transition, a time for renewal and reflection. It's a lesson in perspective, a reminder that sometimes the end is just the beginning of something new. So, while 2012 might have been a letdown for doomsday enthusiasts, for the Maya, it was simply another chapter in the endless cosmic dance. In reflecting on the Maya and their architectural marvels, we find ourselves at a crossroads between past and future. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, innovation and overreach. A civilization that reached for the stars, only to be swallowed by the jungle. Yet their legacy endures, etched in stone and resonating in the echoes of time. What can we learn from the Maya? Perhaps it's the importance of balance between ambition and sustainability, progress and preservation. As we gaze upon the ruins of Tikal, Chichen Itzá, and Palenque, we're reminded of the impermanence of even the greatest human achievements. These structures whisper tales of a civilization that dared to dream big, a culture that wove its understanding of the cosmos into every stone laid. They're a call to appreciate the beauty of what remains and a warning to tread carefully as we build our own legacies. So, let's take a moment to appreciate these architectural wonders, not just as relics of a bygone era, but as blueprints for the future. They challenge us to think beyond the present, to consider how our actions today shape the world of tomorrow. The Maya might have vanished into the jungle, but their spirit lingers, urging us to build with purpose and respect for the world we inhabit. In preserving their legacy, we honor not just their achievements, but the timeless human drive to create, innovate, and endure. As we wrap up this journey through the stone symphony of Maya civilization, remember that history is more than dates and ruins. It's a living tapestry of human experience, filled with lessons waiting to be learned. The Maya remind us that, while empires may crumble and jungles may rise, the stories we carve into the earth endure, whispering to future generations about the dreams and follies of those who came before. Let's ensure those whispers are ones of wisdom and wonder as we build our own monuments to stand the test of time. The story of Greek naval mastery begins with a bunch of passionate paddlers who dared to dream big, or at least as big as you can dream when you're stuck on rocky soil. You see, ancient Greece wasn't exactly blessed with sprawling fields of wheat, more like jagged coastlines and scrappy goats. So the Greeks did what any reasonable people would do. They took to the sea, not because they were born sailors, but because their land was about as fertile as a brick. Jump back to the Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE, and you'll find the Greeks fiddling with some very modest boats, probably the kind that would struggle to win a race against a determined dog paddle. Meanwhile, there was a group of enigmatic marauders known as the Sea Peoples causing a ruckus across the Mediterranean. These folks were like the rock stars of their time. No one really knew where they came from, but they sure knew how to make an entrance. They swept through the seas, toppling empires like it was nobody's business. While the origins of these swashbucklers remain a mystery wrapped in a riddle, their impact was a wake-up call for anyone with a coastline, Greeks included. So, how did the Greeks go from these humble beginnings to becoming the maritime masters of the ancient world? It wasn't just a matter of buying fancier paddles. The transformation was born out of necessity. When your land is better suited to growing philosophers than food, you start looking at the sea with a glint in your eye. And let's face it, no one ever got rich off of growing olive trees alone. Enter the trireme, a sleek, 3-level rowing machine that became the ancient equivalent of a sports car. These babies could cruise at speeds up to 9 knots, thanks to the sweat and toil of 170 rowers crammed inside like sardines in a tin can. Building a fleet of triremes wasn't cheap. Each one cost a cool talent of silver, which in today's terms is a bit like saying, "I'll have 1 yacht, please." But for the Greeks, it was a price worth paying. The sea wasn't just an open stretch of water to them. It was a highway to economic prosperity and political power. Trade routes opened up, grains from Egypt, luxury goods from the east, and all the wine you could sip. Plus, you could always count on the odd pirate adventure to keep things interesting. But let's not get carried away by the romantic vision of brave Greek sailors conquering the high seas. The reality was far less glamorous. For starters, those triremes weren't exactly built for comfort. The rowers sat shoulder to shoulder, and the only air conditioning was whatever breeze happened to blow your way. And when it came to combat, things got downright brutal. Ramming your opponent's ship head-on was a favored tactic, and boarding parties engaged in hand-to-hand combat that was more chaotic than an unsupervised kindergarten class. The political motivations behind Greece's naval innovations were as complex as the labyrinths of Knossos. Take Athens, for example. By the 5th century BCE, it had transformed itself into a naval powerhouse, thanks to a visionary leader named Themistocles. He convinced the Athenians to invest the silver from the Laurium mines into building a fleet. His reasoning: Sparta might have a killer army, but the sea was Athens' domain. And so began a naval arms race that would see Athens go toe-to-toe with the mighty Persian Empire. But hold on before we paint Themistocles as some altruistic hero. His motivations weren't entirely selfless. Control of the sea meant control of the lucrative trade routes, and that translated into power and influence. Themistocles wasn't just building ships. He was crafting an empire, one that would see Athens rise to a golden age of culture and democracy. As we dive deeper into the tale of Greek naval prowess, it's clear that the sea was more than a mere backdrop. It was the stage on which the great dramas of Greek history played out. Whether driven by economic need, political ambition, or the sheer thrill of exploration, the Greeks turned the Mediterranean into their own aquatic playground, crafting a legacy that would ripple through the ages. And as we continue this journey, remember, behind every legendary feat of naval engineering was a rower yearning for a softer seat and a sailor longing for a smoother sail. Just as the salt-stained waves of the Mediterranean were the Greeks' playground, the Persian wars were the ultimate test of their naval prowess. The Athenians, under the guidance of Themistocles, had turned their eyes seaward with a shrewdness that would have impressed even the most cunning of foxes. They knew that their triremes were not just vessels, but the very backbone of Athenian power. And when Xerxes decided to crash the Greek party in 480 BCE with his colossal army, Athens had a plan involving their sleek, speedy triremes and a hefty dose of strategic savvy. Let's talk specifics. The trireme was the ancient equivalent of a Swiss army knife, versatile, efficient, and always ready for action. We're not talking about a few planks nailed together here. This was engineering magic. Built mainly from pine or fir, a trireme stretched about 120 feet long and boasted a beam of around 18 feet. It was a lean, mean rowing machine that could hit speeds up to 9 knots. Imagine 170 rowers working in perfect harmony, their synchronized strokes as precise as a Swiss watch. Each trireme cost roughly 1 talent of silver, or about 26 kg of this precious metal, a considerable investment, equivalent to the annual pay for 170 skilled workers. Maintenance was an ongoing concern, too. After all, you couldn't just leave these beauties out in the elements and hope for the best. Regular upkeep was essential, with repairs and replacements running up costs like a tab at a high-end tavern. Now, let's set the scene for the Battle of Salamis, a clash that would decide not just the fate of Athens, but the entire Grecian world. Picture this: Xerxes, the king of kings, with a fleet so vast it was said to block out the sun. His ships, numbering in the hundreds, glided with a confidence that only overwhelming numerical superiority can provide. But here's the kicker: quantity doesn't always trump quality. Themistocles, with a flair for the dramatic and strategic brilliance, had lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. It was a classic bait-and switch, and it worked like a charm. The cramped conditions of the straits played right into the Athenians' hands. The Persians, with their larger and more cumbersome vessels, found themselves in a maritime traffic jam. It was like trying to maneuver a fleet of cruise liners through a kiddie pool while the Greeks zipped around like speedboats. The triremes, with their shallow drafts and nimble turns, danced circles around the cumbersome Persian ships. Consider this an ancient lesson in maneuverability. Sometimes it's not the size of your fleet, but how you use it. But strategy alone wasn't enough. The Athenians needed a bit of luck, and fate delivered. The Persians, overconfident and disorganized, fell for the trap. As the battle raged, Greek triremes rammed and boarded with the precision of a military drill. Themistocles' plan unraveled the Persian armada, transforming the straits into a watery graveyard of shattered ships and lost dreams. It's said that Xerxes watched from a golden throne on the shores, witnessing his grand ambitions sink beneath the waves. In that moment, the myth of Persian invincibility was shattered like a cheap amphora. Salamis was more than just a victory. It was an emphatic statement. Athens had proven that a smaller, more agile force could topple a giant. It was a triumph of cunning over brute strength, of intellect over intimidation. But let's not romanticize it too much. War is war, and the reality was far from glamorous. The rowers, crammed like sardines, faced exhaustion and peril with each stroke. The sea, though a stage for heroics, was unforgiving. Yet, in their victory, the Athenians found not just survival, but a burgeoning empire. This triumph at Salamis wasn't merely a military win. It was an economic and political game-changer. Athens, riding the waves of their success, tightened their grip on the Delian League, converting it from an alliance into a de facto empire. The tribute poured in, and Athens thrived, transforming into a cultural and economic powerhouse. The spoils of war funded the construction of magnificent structures, Parthenon being the crown jewel. The irony, of course, is that this newfound wealth and power, built on the backs of rowers and tacticians, also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. The Athenian navy wasn't just a tool of war, it was a catalyst for change, a force that propelled Athens into its golden age. It was proof that necessity is the mother of invention, and that sometimes the underdog can rewrite history. As we delve deeper into the story of Greek naval dominance, it's clear that the sea was more than just a battleground. It was the lifeblood of empires, the arena of ambition, and the crucible where the fate of civilizations was forged. Stay tuned as we continue to navigate these turbulent waters, exploring the tides of history and the waves of change that shaped our world. While Athens basked in the glory of its naval triumphs, a new storm brewed on the horizon, one that would pit the Athenian sea lords against the Spartan land warriors in a colossal clash known as the Peloponnesian War. Think of it as the ultimate showdown of surf versus turf, where Athens' triremes and Sparta's hoplites squared off in a struggle for supremacy over the Greek world. Athens had the sea locked down, no doubt, but Sparta had something the Athenians sorely lacked, a killer ground game and a knack for turning military discipline into an art form. Let's set the stage. The year is 431 BCE, and Athens is riding high on the spoils of its naval empire. With coffers brimming thanks to the Delian League's tribute payments, the Athenians had built not just a fleet, but a floating fortress of more than 300 triremes. Each ship was a testament to their naval prowess, a sleek wooden arrowhead ready to pierce through any maritime challenge thrown its way. But here's the catch. Maintaining this armada was as expensive as it was impressive. We're talking about the upkeep of a fleet that guzzled silver like a drunken sailor at a symposium. Each trireme cost a talent of silver annually to maintain, and when you multiply that by hundreds, you start to see why Athens' greatest strength was also its Achilles' heel. Enter Sparta, the land-loving juggernaut with an army so disciplined they could probably march in their sleep. The Spartans weren't interested in the sea. They left the wet work to their allies in Corinth and other Peloponnesian League members. Instead, they focused on what they did best, dominating the land with a phalanx formation that was as unyielding as their reputation. When the war kicked off, it became clear that Athens and Sparta were playing two very different games. It's like pitting a Formula One car against a tank, both powerful, but in entirely different terrains. Economics played a massive role in this rivalry. Athens' prosperity was as much a blessing as a burden. With great wealth came great responsibility, or in this case, great vulnerability. The Athenian economy was tightly interwoven with its maritime success. Trade routes stretched from the Black Sea to Egypt, bringing in everything from grain to luxury goods. But here's the kicker. Cut off those supply lines, and Athens would find itself in the soup faster than you can say, Pericles. This interconnectedness was both a lifeline and a noose, depending on the tide of war. The Spartans knew this, and they played their hand with brutal efficiency. Instead of trying to match Athens ship for ship, they focused on strangling its economy by land. They invaded Attica, burning crops, and laying waste to the countryside like pyromaniac tourists. The Athenians, secure behind their long walls, could only watch as their fields turned to ash. It was a classic case of tactical stalemate. Athens ruling the waves, Sparta ruling the land, and neither able to deliver the knockout blow. Now, let's debunk a common myth, the idea of Athens as a beacon of democracy and freedom during this time. Sure, Athens was the birthplace of democracy, but that didn't mean it always played fair. The Delian League, initially a cooperative alliance, had morphed into an Athenian empire with all the subtlety of an iron fist in a velvet glove. Tribute-paying allies weren't exactly lining up to send their silver with smiles. They were more like clients under a not-so-benevolent protection racket. This power play set the stage for resentment and revolt, which Sparta was all too eager to exploit. Speaking of exploitation, let's address the elephant, or rather, the trireme, in the room, the economic strain of maintaining such a fleet. Running a naval empire wasn't just about flexing military muscle. It required a steady flow of resources to keep those ships afloat and battle-ready. Athens, with its insatiable appetite for silver, depended heavily on its allies and its mines. But what happens when the mines run dry, or the allies start playing ball? Spoiler alert, things get dicey. The Peloponnesian War dragged on for nearly 3 decades, a relentless grind that sapped resources and tested loyalties. For Athens, the war was a costly affair, both in human lives and economic stability. The city's treasury, once a bottomless pit of wealth, began to look more like a shallow puddle. The maintenance of the fleet became a Sisyphean task, as each talent of silver spent on repairs and crew wages was one less for the city's defense and development. Meanwhile, Sparta played the long game, with Persian gold lining their pockets. Yes, the Persians, Athens' old foes, were bankrolling the Spartans. Sparta was able to build a fleet of its own. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very empire Athens had fought to thwart was now funding its greatest rival. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a Greek tragedy. As the war raged on, the strain of hubris began to show in Athens. The city's leaders, drunk on past glories, made decisions that would have Thucydides shaking his head in dismay. The ill-fated Sicilian expedition of 415 BCE is a prime example. Athens, thinking it could replicate its naval successes halfway across the known world, sent a massive fleet to Sicily. The result? A catastrophic failure that saw a significant portion of Athens' fleet decimated and its ambitions sunk alongside its ships. It was a classic case of reaching for the stars and landing face first in the mud. The Peloponnesian War, with its endless cycle of battles and sieges, highlighted a harsh reality. Athens' naval dominance, while impressive, was not invincible. The city's over-reliance on its fleet exposed a vulnerability that Sparta and its allies were all too willing to exploit. The war was a grind, a test of endurance that left both sides battered and weary. And as the conflict dragged on, it became increasingly clear that the true cost of war was measured not just in lost ships and soldiers, but in the erosion of ideals and the fraying of alliances. In the end, it was not just military might that decided the outcome, but economic resilience and strategic adaptability. Athens, once the unrivaled master of the Mediterranean, found itself humbled by the very forces it had sought to control. The lessons of the Peloponnesian War were clear. Even the mightiest of naval powers must tread carefully, for the sea, like fortune, is a fickle mistress. As we leave this chapter of ancient history, consider the tale of Athens and Sparta not just as a story of conflict, but as a cautionary tale of ambition and overreach. The Peloponnesian War is a testament to the complexities of power and the volatile dance between dominance and downfall. Stay with us as we continue to explore the ripples of this turbulent period, where the tides of history continue to shape the world in ways both profound and unexpected. As we sail away from the ruins of the Peloponnesian War, let's not pretend the Greeks were lounging around sipping ouzo, reminiscing about the good old days. Nope, they were neck-deep in realpolitik, licking their wounds and trying to figure out how to keep the Mediterranean's fickle mistress from slipping through their fingers entirely. The Athenian Empire, once the envy of the known world, found itself limping along, a shadow of its former glory. So, what happened next? Enter stage left. The Macedonians, with their own brand of imperial ambition and a rather unconventional approach to naval power. You see, while the Greeks were busy perfecting the art of rowing and ramming, the Macedonians were plotting a different course altogether, thanks to a young upstart named Alexander the Great. Alexander wasn't interested in just sailing the high seas. Oh no, he had his eyes set on conquering the whole darn continent. Why bother with boats when you can march your way to glory? His strategy was a bit like swapping a sleek sports car for a trusty tank. Sure, it wasn't as fast, but it could crush anything in its path. Alexander's empire building was a land affair. His armies thundered across Persia, stormed into Egypt, and even nudged the edges of India. We're talking about a military juggernaut that made landlubbers out of sailors. His forces weren't just about numbers. They had a tactical brilliance that made the world sit up and take notice. But here's the kicker. Despite his land-focused strategy, Alexander didn't completely ignore the seas. He knew the value of a good harbor and the importance of securing supply lines. Yet, unlike the Greeks, he wasn't going to bet the farm on a fleet. While Alexander was busy rewriting the map of the ancient world, naval technology wasn't standing still. The trireme, once the pinnacle of maritime engineering, found itself sharing waters with bigger, bolder designs. Enter the quadriremes and quinquiremes. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of upgrading from a compact car to a minivan. These larger ships could carry more soldiers, more supplies, and more muscle. They were the next step in naval evolution, a response to the changing demands of warfare and commerce. The Macedonians, though not as sea-obsessed as the Greeks, weren't blind to these developments. They understood that control of the sea lanes meant more than just trade. It was the lifeblood of empire. However, their approach was more about strategic coastal control than full-on naval dominance. Alexander's successors, the Diadochi, continued this trend, with fleets that were more about strategic positioning than sheer naval might. They knew that while the sea was important, it was the land that held the real prize. But let's not get too cozy with this idea of Macedonian maritime indifference. The successors of Alexander, men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus, weren't exactly sitting on their hands when it came to naval matters. Each carved out a chunk of Alexander's empire, and each understood that a fleet could tip the scales in their favor during the inevitable squabbles over territory. The naval arms race was far from over. It had just evolved. Larger ships, seasoned crews, and innovative tactics became the order of the day. Now, before we crown these larger ships the new kings of the sea, let's dispel a myth or two. Sure, they were impressive, but bigger wasn't always better. The larger vessels were less maneuverable and required more resources to build and maintain. It was a bit like trading in your nimble sports car for a gas-guzzling SUV. Impressive, but unwieldy. The maintenance costs for these maritime behemoths were staggering, and they required a level of logistical support that made the accountants of the day break out in a cold sweat. As the Macedonian influence spread, the stage was set for the next big player. Cue the Romans, with their penchant for empire building and a knack for borrowing what worked. You see, the Romans weren't just about roads and legions. They were savvy enough to recognize the power of a strong navy. And here's where the real twist comes in. The Romans took the naval baton and ran with it, transforming the Mediterranean into their own personal mare nostrum. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, didn't just adopt Greek and Macedonian naval tactics. They adapted them. They saw the potential of larger ships, but also understood the value of innovation. Enter the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to turn naval battles into something more akin to land skirmishes. It was a game changer, turning the tide in their favor during the First Punic War against Carthage. This wasn't just about ships. It was about strategy, innovation, and the willingness to blend old ideas with new technologies. By the time the Romans were done with their naval upgrades, the Mediterranean had become a Roman lake. Their mastery of naval logistics and technology meant that Greek and Macedonian naval prowess was fast becoming a relic of the past. It was like watching a new kid on the block outshine the old masters, and for the Greeks, it was a harsh reality check. The evolution from triremes to larger ships like quadriremes and quinquiremes wasn't just a technological shift. It was a reflection of changing times. Maritime warfare was no longer just about who could row the fastest or ram the hardest. It was about who could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast the competition. The Greeks, once the undisputed champions of the sea, found themselves outpaced by a new breed of empire builders who saw the world as a canvas for their ambitions. So, here we are, witnessing the decline of Greek naval supremacy. The sea, once their playground, had become a stage for new players with different rules. The Macedonians and Romans weren't just rewriting the playbook. They were crafting a new narrative of power, one that would see the Mediterranean world transformed in ways the Greeks could scarcely have imagined. As we chart the courses of these ancient tides, remember, history is less about the ships themselves and more about the people who dared to dream beyond the horizon. And in this grand tale of naval mastery, the Greeks left a legacy that echoes through time, whispering of past glories and uncharted waters yet to explore. The Greeks might have been eclipsed by the Romans and their Mediterranean ambitions, but the echoes of their maritime mastery linger like a catchy tune. Let's reflect on the legacy they left behind, a legacy that's more than just tales of triremes and salty sea battles. Their naval innovations weren't just historical footnotes. They were the building blocks for the complex web of maritime strategy that stretches right up to today. The trireme, for instance, wasn't just a nifty boat. It was the precursor to the modern warship. Its sleek design and multi-tiered rowers inspired naval architects for centuries. Remember those triremes? They were like the smartphones of their day. Everyone wanted one, and they changed how people interacted with the world. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you see shades of these ancient vessels in modern destroyers and aircraft carriers. The basic principle of maximizing speed and maneuverability while packing a punch is still alive and kicking. Sure, we've swapped oars for engines and rowers for radar operators, but the essence remains. A floating fortress capable of enforcing power and protecting interests. Now, let's not forget the strategic genius that came with these ships. The Greeks weren't just about brute force. They were the original chess players of the sea, using cunning and guile to outsmart their enemies. The Battle of Salamis wasn't just a fluke victory, it was textbook strategy. The idea of luring a larger force into a narrow space where their size became a disadvantage. That's a trick still used in naval warfare today. It's like a classic underdog story where brains beat brawn, and every military strategist worth their salt has taken notes. But here's the kicker. Greek naval prowess wasn't just about winning battles. It was about surviving in a world where your neighbor might just decide your city looks like a nice place to vacation permanently. The sea was a lifeline for the Greeks, a highway for trade, and a barrier against invaders. The economic impact of their naval dominance is hard to overstate. By controlling the seas, they controlled trade routes, and by controlling trade routes, they controlled wealth. It's a lesson every maritime power has taken to heart. Control the sea, control your destiny. The romance of Greek naval heroism, though, often glosses over the less glamorous reality. For the average rower, life was less about glory and more about survival. Cramped conditions, brutal training, and a diet that would make a Spartan wince with a daily grind. These sailors weren't just fighting for honor. They were fighting to keep their cities fed and their families safe. Their heroism was rooted in necessity, not just in noble ideals. The romantic vision of Greek naval glory, with its tales of daring and adventure, often skips the part where it was less adventure and more arduous labor. Yet, we can't help but romanticize. The Greeks, with their tales of gods and monsters, knew how to spin a good yarn. But beneath the myth, there's a gritty reality that's just as compelling. The Athenian Empire, for all its cultural achievements, was built on the backs of these sailors and the silver they brought home. The legacy of the Greek navy, therefore, is twofold. It's a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of survival. As we connect the dots from ancient seas to modern waters, it's clear that the Greeks set a standard that resonates even today. Their innovations laid the groundwork for centuries of naval development, and their strategies remain a core part of military training. The idea that a smaller, more agile force can outmaneuver a larger opponent is as relevant now as it was on the choppy waters of Salamis. In the end, the story of Greek naval mastery is a complex tapestry of innovation, struggle, and survival. It's a story that reminds us that the sea, while a source of opportunity, is also a stage for human ambition and folly. The Greeks knew this well, and their legacy is a reminder that while ships may change, the tides of human nature remain as capricious as ever. As we drop anchor on this journey through ancient maritime history, remember the lessons of the Greeks. Sometimes, it's not just about the battles you win, but the course you set and the legacy you leave behind. In a dusty corner of the ancient world, where the Middle Eastern sun baked the earth with relentless focus, a young upstart named Cyrus decided he wasn't just going to sit around and watch his sheep. Nope, this guy had plans, the kind that make history books, not just wool sweaters. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great, as he'd come to be known, pulled off a trick that would have even Houdini nodding in approval. He escaped the obscurity of his relatively minor position among the Persians and turned it into the launchpad for an empire that would stretch across 3 continents. Talk about a career move. Now, Cyrus wasn't just some ambitious kid with a dream. He was a master of the ancient art of empire building, kind of like the Steve Jobs of the ancient world, but with fewer turtlenecks and more swords. The Achaemenid Empire was born not out of thin air, but from a chaotic blend of strategic brilliance, a few well-timed weddings, and the occasional hostile takeover. Cyrus knew that before he could conquer the world, he had to start at home by uniting the fractious Persian tribes. It's like convincing your family to agree on one show to watch on Netflix, but on a much, much grander scale. Cyrus's first big move was taking on the Medes, his neighbors to the north, and, conveniently, his family through a little thing called marriage. By 550 BCE, he had managed to turn what was supposed to be a subservient relationship with the Median king, Astyages, into a full-on coup d'etat. Some historians suggest that Astyages' own troops were less than thrilled with his leadership style, which involved a fair bit of tyranny and not enough inspiring speeches. Cyrus's ability to win them over was less about charm and more about offering a better deal, one that didn't involve being on the wrong end of a capricious king's wrath. It's worth noting the economics of Cyrus's early empire-building efforts. Conquering your neighbors back in the day wasn't just about showing off your military prowess. It was a strategic play for resources. Think of it like an ancient Kickstarter campaign, but instead of pledges, you got tribute. The Medes brought with them a wealth of resources, and crucially, a power base that made further expansion possible. If you wanted to build an empire, you needed cash, or at least the ancient equivalent in gold, silver, and fertile land. And speaking of fertile, let's not forget the marital alliances that Cyrus leveraged to solidify his rule. His marriage to Cassandane, a Persian noblewoman, wasn't just a romantic subplot, but a political maneuver designed to strengthen his ties with the Persian aristocracy. It's the kind of strategic matchmaking that would make even modern political consultants swoon. By tying himself to influential families, Cyrus ensured that, when he marched his troops into battle, he had the support of key power players back home. It turns out that having your in-laws on your side is just as important in empire building as it is in surviving Thanksgiving dinners. Cyrus wasn't just a brilliant strategist. He was also a savvy administrator who understood the importance of keeping his newly acquired subjects happy. Unlike many rulers of his time, he didn't rule with an iron fist, more like a firm handshake. He respected the customs and religions of the people he conquered, a policy that earned him the loyalty and respect of diverse populations. This approach was not just enlightened, it was practical. Happy subjects are less likely to rebel, which means you can spend more time expanding your empire and less time putting down uprisings. The Persians under Cyrus were not just conquerors, they were innovators. They pioneered new ways of administration that would influence empires for centuries. The empire was divided into satrapies, or provinces, each overseen by a governor, or satrap. This system allowed for efficient management and ensured that Cyrus could maintain control over vast distances. Imagine trying to run a multi-continent empire without email or telephones. It's enough to make any modern CEO break out in a cold sweat. Now, let's not get too misty-eyed about the whole affair. While Cyrus might have been a relatively benevolent ruler for his time, empire building was still a brutal business. Military campaigns were bloody, and resistance was met with decisive force. The ancient world wasn't exactly a place of peace and love, and Cyrus's rise to power was paved with the usual mix of political intrigue, betrayal, and war. Yet, it's precisely this blend of ruthlessness and pragmatism, tempered by a genuine knack for governance, that cemented his legacy as Cyrus the Great. It's no wonder that Cyrus's story has been romanticized over the millennia. There's something undeniably appealing about the narrative of a young man who rises from humble beginnings to change the course of history. But let's not forget the realities behind the legend. The Achaemenid Empire wasn't built in a day, nor by one man alone. It was a complex web of alliances, battles, and negotiations, a testament to the messy, often contradictory nature of human ambition. So, as the sun set on the chaotic origins of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus stood not just as a ruler, but as a harbinger of a new era. An era where the old world order was upended, and the Persians, once dismissed as a mere footnote in the annals of history, became the headline act. And all it took was a little Houdini magic, a lot of strategic marriages, and the kind of military acumen that would make even the most seasoned general sit up and take notice. As the curtain rose on the next act of the Achaemenid drama, Cyrus was already plotting his next grand escapade. With the Medes under his belt and a burgeoning empire in need of expansion, Cyrus set his sights on Lydia, a kingdom renowned for its wealth, and its king, Croesus, whose name was synonymous with riches. If history had a Forbes Ancient 100 list, Croesus would have been the Jeff Bezos of his day, except his fortune was measured in gold status and not stock options. Cyrus, never one to shy away from a challenge, saw in Lydia both a worthy adversary and a juicy prize. Around 547 BCE, He mobilized his forces for an epic showdown in a place called Thimbra. Now, let's set the scene. Croesus, confident in his oracle-approved victory, spoiler alert, oracles were notoriously vague, marched his troops into battle with all the swagger of a king who's never lost. But Cyrus, the ancient world's equivalent of a chess grandmaster, had a few tricks up his sleeve, literally. Enter the camels. Yes, you heard me right. In a move that would make any military strategist nod in appreciation, Cyrus used camels to spook the Lydian cavalry. Apparently, horses find camels about as charming as your cat does the vacuum cleaner. The sight and smell of these foreign beasts sent the Lydian horses into a frenzy, throwing Croesus's cavalry into disarray. This, my friends, is what you call a tactical masterstroke, or just an incredibly lucky guess. Either way, it worked. Croesus was captured, and Lydia became part of the ever-expanding Persian Empire. But the story doesn't end there. In a twist worthy of a Hollywood script, Cyrus didn't punish Croesus with the usual ancient world fanfare of a swift execution. Instead, he turned the vanquished king into a royal advisor. Talk about a career pivot. Croesus, the man who was once the wealthiest king alive, now found himself offering counsel to the very man who had stripped him of his throne. It's a bit like being demoted from CEO to consultant, but with fewer conference calls and more existential dread. With Lydia secured, Cyrus turned his attention to Babylon, that glittering jewel of Mesopotamia. By 539 BCE, he was ready to make his move. Now, conquering Babylon wasn't just about adding another notch to his imperial belt. It was about securing a cultural and economic powerhouse. Babylon was the New York City of the ancient world, a hub of wealth, learning, and yes, bureaucracy. Capturing it would be like acquiring the keys to an ancient Wall Street, but Babylon wouldn't fall to the sword. Cyrus, ever the pragmatist, used a combination of military might and psychological savvy. You see, Babylon's walls were legendary, impenetrable even. So Cyrus diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water level enough to allow his troops to sneak in through the riverbed. It was a classic case of Trojan horse, thinking without the wooden horse, just some good old-fashioned engineering prowess. Once inside, Cyrus was welcomed not with resistance, but with open arms. This wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a testament to his reputation as a liberator rather than a conqueror. Babylon's people were fed up with their ruler, Nabonidus, and Cyrus offered a fresh start. It's the kind of PR win that would make modern spin doctors weep with envy. Speaking of PR, let's address the legendary Cyrus Cylinder, often touted as the first human rights charter. It's a lovely story. Cyrus, the ancient world's champion of liberty and justice, setting the standard for future generations. But let's pump the brakes on that narrative for a moment. The Cylinder was more of an ancient press release than a Magna Carta. It outlined Cyrus's propaganda, promising religious freedom and restoration of temples, sure, but it was also a strategic move to legitimize his rule among the conquered peoples. A clever bit of spin, yes, but perhaps not the dawn of human rights as we know it. And let's not forget the logistical nightmare that was ancient warfare. Conquering empires wasn't all glory and triumph. It was also about moving armies across vast and hostile terrains. Camels, those humped wonders of the desert, were the unsung heroes of Cyrus's campaigns. Reliable, sturdy, and able to carry heavy loads across arid landscapes, they were the ancient equivalent of long-haul trucks. They transported supplies, weapons, and the occasional exhausted soldier. Without them, Cyrus's grand conquests might have been little more than ambitious pipe dreams. As the Persian Empire stretched its tendrils across the known world, it was held together by a patchwork of roads and trade routes, the ancient arteries of commerce and communication. These roads were the lifeblood of the empire, facilitating not just the movement of armies, but also the exchange of ideas and culture. It was a logistical feat that would set the stage for future empires, proving that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on the field, but on the drawing board. So, as Cyrus's empire continued its inexorable expansion, he stood not just as a conqueror, but as a visionary, a ruler who understood that power was not just about military might, but about the art of administration, diplomacy, and yes, occasional camel. His successors would inherit an empire unlike any that had come before, a sprawling, diverse realm that would challenge their abilities and test their resolve. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave Cyrus on the cusp of greatness his empire sprawling across continents, his legacy already cemented in the annals of history. The stage is set for a new chapter, as the Achaemenid Empire continues to shape the world in ways that would echo down the ages. Stay tuned, because the saga of Persian glory is far from over. As the curtain rises on the next act of the Persian epic, Cyrus the Great's legacy looms large, but the empire's star is about to shift. Enter Darius I, the man with the blueprint for turning a sprawling empire into a well-oiled bureaucratic juggernaut. If Cyrus was the visionary who sketched the empire's outline, Darius was the diligent architect who filled in the details. Around 522 BCE, Darius found himself at the helm of an empire that was more jigsaw puzzle than cohesive state, with pieces scattered from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. Darius's genius lay not in conquest, but in consolidation. He took the empire's chaos and turned it into a symphony of administration. His first stroke of brilliance, the introduction of satraps, essentially regional governors who kept the empire's vast territories under control. Imagine trying to manage a global corporation with branches in every time zone. That's the kind of logistical nightmare Darius faced, and yet he managed to pull it off with flair. Each satrapy was a mini-empire of its own, tasked with local governance, tax collection, and military defense. They were the empire's nerve centers, ensuring that Darius's commands reached even the most distant corners of his realm. Now, let's talk about the Royal Road. Forget your overnight shipping and next-day delivery services. This ancient highway was the backbone of the Achaemenid communication network. Stretching over 500 miles from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, the Royal Road was the ancient world's answer to FedEx, enabling messages to travel at lightning speed, by ancient standards. Anyway, couriers could cover the entire distance in just 7 days, thanks to a relay system that would make modern logistics companies green with envy. It was this unparalleled infrastructure that allowed Darius to maintain control over his empire, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the ones that connect us. But hold on to your drachmas, because Darius wasn't just content with reorganizing territories and paving roads. He had grander economic visions. He introduced a standardized currency system, the daric, a gold coin that became the backbone of the Persian economy. This move was as revolutionary as the invention of the credit card, facilitating trade and commerce across the empire's vast expanse. No more bartering your livestock for goods. Now you could carry your wealth in your pocket. This economic stability was a linchpin of Darius's rule, making the Persian Empire a commercial powerhouse of the ancient world. And let's not forget Darius's penchant for espionage. The empire's security apparatus, charmingly known as the king's eyes and ears, was an early version of a spy network. These agents roamed the empire, gathering intelligence and ensuring that satraps remained loyal. It was a system that kept everyone on their toes, because you never knew if your neighbor, or even your spouse, might be reporting back to the king. Paranoia, it seems, was an integral part of keeping an empire in line, but it worked. Darius's network of informants was a vital tool in preventing rebellion and maintaining order across the empire. Darius's reforms weren't just about control. They were about creating a sense of unity and identity within the empire. He understood that a patchwork quilt of cultures and languages needed a common thread to bind them together. His solution was a new capital, Persepolis, a city that embodied the empire's grandeur and diversity. Built at the intersection of several major trade routes, Persepolis was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. It was the ultimate symbol of Achaemenid power, a city that proclaimed to the world, "Here is the heart of the empire." This isn't to say that Darius's reign was without its hiccups. Keeping an empire together was no easy feat, and revolts were as common as sandstorms in the desert. But Darius was nothing if not resilient. He quashed uprisings with a mix of military might and diplomatic finesse. The key to his success lay in his ability to adapt and innovate, to see the empire not just as a collection of territories, but as a cohesive whole. It's tempting to view Darius as a micromanager, a ruler obsessed with the minutiae of administration. But that would be missing the bigger picture. His reforms laid the foundation for an empire that would endure for 2 centuries, influencing countless successors. The Achaemenid Empire was a marvel of organization, a testament to the power of governance over sheer force. Darius's legacy was one of stability and prosperity, a golden age that would be remembered long after the empire itself had crumbled into dust. Yet, let's not romanticize Darius too much. His was an empire built on the backs of countless laborers, soldiers, and bureaucrats. The royal road, the satrapies, the currency, they were the result of hard, often back-breaking work. It's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of it all, but let's not forget the human cost of empire building. The Achaemenid achievements came at a price, one that was paid by the ordinary people who toiled in the shadows of history. So, as we leave Darius and his empire at the height of its glory, let's remember that the story doesn't end here. The Achaemenid Empire was a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving and adapting to the challenges of its time. And as we move forward in our tale, we'll see how this remarkable civilization continued to shape the world, leaving an indelible mark on the pages of history. Stay tuned, because the saga of Persian glory is still unfolding, with twists and turns yet to come. As we leave Darius and his empire at the height of its glory, let's pivot to the cultural kaleidoscope that was the Achaemenid Empire, a place where diversity wasn't a checkbox on a corporate form, but a vibrant, lived reality. Imagine a realm where your neighbor might speak Babylonian, the guy 2 stalls over in the marketplace is chattering in Egyptian, and your satrap could very well be a former Lydian prince. This wasn't a melting pot. It was more like a cultural jamboree, with every corner of the empire adding its own spice to the stew. Now, before you start romanticizing this ancient utopia, let's get one thing straight. The Achaemenid embrace of diversity was as much about strategy as it was about benevolence. Cyrus the Great, remember him, the empire's founding father, had already set the ball rolling with his policy of respecting local customs and religions. This wasn't just heartwarming altruism, folks. It was a shrewd move to maintain control, force people to abandon their guards and traditions, and you'll have rebellions sprouting faster than you can say satrapy. But let them keep their cultural identity, and you've got yourself a bunch of happy tax-paying citizens. Speaking of which, let's not overlook the heavy tax burdens that funded these grand imperial projects. Yes, the empire's coffers weren't filled by some ancient version of Kickstarter. Taxes were the backbone of the empire's finances, levied on everything from agricultural produce to trade goods. The Persians had a tax rate that would make even the IRS blush, up to 20% on income, depending on the province. And while we're on the topic of money, let's talk logistics. The empire's tax collectors were no slouches. They were like the ancient world's version of accountants, armed with papyrus scrolls and a penchant for meticulous record-keeping. But back to culture, because that's where things get really interesting. The Achaemenid Empire wasn't just an administrative marvel, it was a cultural powerhouse. Think of Persepolis, for example, the empire's glittering capital, a testament to the architectural genius of its builders. Constructed under Darius I and his successors, Persepolis was an opulent showcase of imperial might, a place where marble staircases led to grand halls filled with intricate reliefs depicting the empire's diversity. Here, you'd find delegations from every corner of the known world, each bearing gifts for the great king, a veritable who's who of ancient diplomats. Now, let's not get carried away with the grandeur of Persepolis without acknowledging the darker side of its splendor. Building such a monumental city wasn't a matter of snapping fingers and summoning stone masons. It required a labor force of thousands, toiling under the hot Persian sun. These workers weren't all volunteers. Mind you, many were conscripts or slaves, their backs bent under the weight of imperial ambition. It's a stark reminder that the dazzling achievements of the Achaemenids came at a human cost, one that often gets glossed over in the grand narrative. And then there's the matter of religion. Enter Zoroastrianism, the empire's unofficial spiritual backbone. Founded by the prophet Zoroaster, this faith preached a dualistic worldview of good versus evil, light versus dark, Ahura Mazda versus Angra Mainyu. It was the moral compass that guided many Persians, including their kings. But before you start picturing a theocracy, hold your horses, or should I say, hold your camels. Zoroastrianism didn't impose itself with the iron fist of later religious empires. Instead, it coexisted alongside a rich tapestry of local beliefs, from the gods of Egypt to the deities of the Indus Valley. This religious tolerance wasn't just enlightened governance, it was practical politics. By allowing various faiths to flourish, The Achaemenids avoided the kind of sectarian strife that could tear an empire apart faster than you can say, Herodotus. Of course, this policy also meant that religion was a tool of statecraft, wielded to keep the peace and ensure loyalty. It's a fascinating study in contrasts, an empire that was both a spiritual sanctuary and a political chessboard. But don't let the stories of tolerance and multiculturalism fool you into thinking the Achaemenids were softies. Their military might was legendary, as was their ability to demand tribute from subject peoples, not a voluntary donation, but a mandatory contribution to the empire's ever-expanding budget. These tributes weren't just sacks of grain or herds of livestock. They included precious metals, exotic goods, and yes, even people, skilled artisans who contributed to the empire's cultural and economic vibrancy. Let's pause here to appreciate the economic engine that was the Persian Empire. With trade routes crisscrossing its vast territories, the Achaemenids facilitated an exchange of goods and ideas that would make your local flea market look like a lemonade stand. From the spices of India to the silver of Anatolia, the empire was a commercial hub, its roads teeming with merchants and traders. The Persians understood that power wasn't just about armies and conquests. It was about controlling the flow of wealth and resources, a lesson that echoes through the ages. Yet, as we marvel at the empire's achievements, let's not overlook the tensions simmering beneath the surface. The Achaemenid Empire was a sprawling entity, and maintaining its cohesion required constant vigilance. Communication was key, as we've seen with the Royal Road, but so was ensuring that local leaders remained loyal to the great king. This was no small feat, given the vast distances and cultural differences involved. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required a mix of diplomacy, coercion, and good old-fashioned espionage. As we delve deeper into this ancient world, it's clear that the Achaemenid Empire was more than the sum of its parts. It was a grand experiment in multicultural governance, a colossal undertaking that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the ancient world. And as we continue our exploration, we'll see how this empire, with all its complexities and contradictions, laid the groundwork for future civilizations. So, stay tuned, because the saga of Persian glory is far from over. In our next installment, we'll explore the empire's challenges, internal and external, and how it navigated the turbulent waters of history. The Achaemenid Empire may have been a marvel of its time, but its story is one of constant evolution, a testament to the resilience of human ambition. As the Achaemenid Empire reached its zenith, it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. Like a Jenga tower that keeps getting higher, the empire's impressive height was both its triumph and its peril. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how this colossal structure began to wobble. First up, let's talk about the Greco-Persian Wars, a series of clashes that could rival any modern-day blockbuster in terms of drama and stakes. The Persians, under King Darius I, weren't content with their empire's luxurious borders. They had their eyes on Greece, that rocky outcrop of city-states known for its philosophical debates and unfortunate propensity for infighting. Around 499 BCE, the Ionian revolt sparked the fuse, with Greek city-states in Asia Minor rebelling against Persian rule. Darius, understandably irked, decided to teach those upstart Greeks a lesson. Cue the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. Now, if you're picturing marathon runners dashing across the ancient plains, you're not entirely off. The battle saw the Athenians, vastly outnumbered with around 10,000 troops to Persia's 25,000, pull off an underdog victory that would make any sports fan cheer. The Persians, despite their numerical advantage, were sent packing, their dreams of easy conquest dashed on the rocky Greek soil. The Greek victory was the equivalent of a David and Goliath tale, minus the slingshots, and plus a lot of sweaty Greeks. Fast forward a decade, and Darius's son, Xerxes I, decided to pick up where his father left off. Think of Xerxes as the guy who's never met a grudge he didn't like. In 480 BCE, he launched a massive invasion of Greece, allegedly mobilizing an army of over 100,000 men, though Herodotus, our ancient tabloid journalist, might have had a flair for exaggeration. The Battle of Thermopylae followed, where King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans became the stuff of legends. Yes, the Spartans were eventually defeated, but their stand became a rallying cry for Greek unity, showing that a story doesn't need a happy ending to be a hit. Xerxes managed to sack Athens, but the Greeks had their own ace up their toga, Themistocles, the naval strategist. At the Battle of Salamis, the Greeks lured the mighty Persian fleet into a bottleneck, using their smaller, more maneuverable ships to devastating effect. The Persians, finding themselves outmaneuvered, suffered a humiliating defeat. It was a classic tale of brains over brawn, and it marked a turning point. The Persian threat to Greece was effectively neutralized, leaving Xerxes to slink back home, licking his wounds and plotting his next move, which, spoiler alert, never quite materialized. Now, turning our gaze inward, the Persian Empire was wrestling with a beast of its own making, internal strife. Empires, much like rock bands, often fall apart not because of external pressures, but due to the drama within. Enter the satraps, those regional governors who were supposed to keep things running smoothly in the empire's far-flung territories. But these satraps were a mixed bag. Some were loyal, others were ambitious, and a few were just plain corrupt. Managing them was like herding cats, if cats had armies, and a penchant for rebellion. Economic strain was another silent killer. The empire's grandiosity came with a hefty price tag. Taxes were high, and the burden often fell on the shoulders of the common folk. Discontent simmered, and in some regions it boiled over. The satrap revolt of the 4th century BCE was a prime example, where regional governors decided they'd rather be kings in their own right than vassals to the Persian throne. Artaxerxes Roman II, the reigning king, spent much of his time quelling these uprisings, a testament to the fact that ruling an empire was as much about putting out fires as it was about lighting them. But the real game-changer came in the form of a young Macedonian upstart. Enter Alexander the Great, a man whose ego was only rivaled by his military genius. In 334 BCE, Alexander launched his campaign against Persia, and like a well-oiled machine, his army sliced through the Achaemenid defenses with alarming efficiency. At the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander faced Darius Roman III, the last Persian king. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance won the day, forcing Darius to flee. It was the beginning of the end for the Achaemenid Empire, as Alexander methodically dismantled its power, piece by piece. By 330 BCE, Alexander had captured Persepolis, the heart of the Persian Empire. In an act of both symbolic and literal destruction, he set fire to the city, a move that was as much about revenge as it was about erasing Persian influence. The blaze consumed the architectural wonder, leaving behind ashes and the faint echoes of the empire's former glory. Alexander's conquest was swift and brutal, and by the time he was done, the Achaemenid Empire was little more than a memory. Yet, in its decline, the empire left a legacy that would endure. The Persian approach to governance, with its satrapies and roads, influenced subsequent empires, including Alexander's own. The cultural and economic exchanges facilitated by the Achaemenids laid the groundwork for a connected world, a precursor to the globalization we see today. And while the empire might have crumbled, its impact on the fabric of history was indelible. In the end, the story of the Achaemenid Empire is one of ambition and fragility, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the depths of human folly. It's a reminder that empires, like all things, have their limits, and that the real story lies not just in their rise, but in how they fall. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, aware that the echoes of Persia's glory still reverberate in the world today.